I know I promised it wouldn't be 3 hours. We just crossed that mark, and I'm so sorry.
Maybe
got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
There's a lot to dig into.
Maybe it'll get slimmed down in the edit. You never know.
Yeah, but but it was definitely like, we're going to try to keep this under 3 hours. They didn't.
Yes. The gang goes over 3 hours.
Everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jmike Folson.
I'm so excited, Case. Today's a special day. It's a special day.
It is a special day. It's a day that we've been waiting for. And in fact, full disclosure, we are probably going to be waiting on this getting released a little while, because today we are talking about My Adventures with Superman, an animated work. And before the episode, we were having a conversation of, is that struck material? Is it not? I don't know. We're in the middle of the SAG strike. I'm going to hold off on it at least until we've gotten through other episodes that we have banked. But we are joined by people who most of you know as voices on the internet. We are joined by the lovely hosts of the Overly Sarcastic Productions YouTube channel. So we've got Red.
Hello.
And we've got Blue.
Hey, so excited to be here.
We're staying in our comfort zone of being voices on the internet for this one.
So for people who are not familiar with Overly Sarcastic, give some quick explanation.
We have a YouTube channel, which we basically split down the middle. I talk about tropes and literature and stuff like that. And I also sometimes talk about myths and the occasional classic.
And I've got the other half doing a lot of stuff on history, world culture, ancient literature, a little bit of architecture here and there. And together we talk about how cool the world is, and then also occasionally little bits of media here and there.
Just little 2-hour slices.
Yeah, little 2-hour discussions of our thoughts on Superman media over the years.
And occasionally other things sometimes, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been very happy to see the rise of that, because your channel has always been like the perfect sliver of the Venn diagram of my interests. Like, ooh. I was a classical studies major. I am a giant nerd. There is a theater sarcophagus lid from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat behind me.
I was wondering what that
was. As well as a cutesy picture of Batman and a comic book rack and like a bunch of D&D stuff. So, you know.
Oh, wait, is that JL8 Batman specifically?
Yes, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's excellent eyes on that one.
Thank you.
So I've been a longtime fan of your channel. Red, you were awesome enough to come on my other show, Another Pass, a little while back.
Oh, so fun.
Talking about Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which was a fun conversation about a weird movie.
Yeah.
But I've been very glad to have the two of you start doing your detailed diatribes about Superman stuff over the years. It's been really fun to see that coverage. And then when you mentioned this show, which Jmike and I had separately been texting about, like, oh my God, I love this show. Oh my God, I love this show. And you mentioned it on the Patreon bonus stuff that you do for the spinoff podcast of your YouTube channel. So the Patreon spinoff of the spinoff podcast of the YouTube.
It's Matryoshka content.
Yeah.
After show, affectionately referred to as the ass.
I was like, you know what? I'm going to see if you guys want to talk about it some more.
Yeah. Get back in the saddle. Talk more about Superman.
Yeah.
Yeah, so My Adventures with Superman. So much fun.
Oh,
so
yeah.
good.
Absolutely.
Out of the gate, I want to get Red's quote on this, where I finished watching it the other day, and Red was like, I am so impressed by this show because I would never have written it myself on the simple basis that I would find it too indulgent for what I want in Superman.
Yeah, that was basically it. I was like, wow, a Superman that's not just like emotionally vulnerable, but like actively a very nice and kind person whose core is like sorrowful and trying to find his place in the world, not angry punch man Jesus figure. Like, this is a version I would feel weird about writing. Like, it's too perfectly tailored for my interests.
Yeah, and after like the Superman videos we've done on our channel where we're talking about, oh man, like there are various pieces of Superman media that get it, but we never really feel like there's one that just encapsulates it. And then here comes this show, and it's like, oh no, it's this one. It's this one.
Yeah. You ever get an adaptation so good that you realize every other adaptation you've liked, you've just been settling for? That's where I'm at.
There's a specific thing in this that I have that exact thought about, which we'll get to eventually.
Yes.
But it's interesting right now because we were inundated with like a wave of like Superman is evil kind of media, which is really annoying and kind of whatever. But I've been really enjoying a lot of the Superman as dad stuff that's been coming out recently. Yeah. Superman and Lois is a lot of fun. I love the dynamic of Clark Kent, the goofy kind of persona being played up as a way of embarrassing his kids. Like, I think that's a really fun element there. And it nails a specific point in Superman's progression that I think hasn't been really explored very well. But I actually think this explores one that we gloss over a lot, like the early days of Superman before he's established, but also after he's Superman.
Yeah.
Like, it's not Superboy, it's not him in hiding.
It's not Smallville.
It's not, exactly.
This
is that window that is usually like, it's the pilot of the series, but it's the whole season.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they do a really good job of having that young Superman who lacks confidence in a lot of things, but is very true to who his core is.
I had a realization about the show when I got through like the first few episodes. Clark Kent is the only person who doesn't know what Superman is going to look like, basically. But Clark Kent is by his very nature the kind of person who would create Superman. You know, anytime we see a Superman origin story, there's always this element of dramatic irony. The audience knows he's going to become Superman. Like the whole time you watch Smallville, it's like, he's going to be Superman. That's a Superman thing. Or like, that's a Superman bad guy, or that's a Superman power. And it's got all those like, oh, Leonardo da Vinci, that guy will never amount to anything, like those kinds of jokes of like, oh, I see where this is going. We can be cheeky about it. But starting from the premise of like, Superman doesn't exist yet. Clark Kent exists. He doesn't know who he's going to be. We know who he's going to be, but Clark Kent needs to be the kind of person who would choose to be that. And it's this kind of underrated component of his characterization in any story that treats becoming Superman as his inevitable destiny that he has very little control over. Like in the Snyder movies, when it's like, here is your Superman suit, put it on so you can become Superman. Like they do that a little bit in this show, but like, you know, in the original comics, he's like, I'm going to be a superhero. And his mom is like, I'll sew you your costume and then you can go and be a superhero. And at every step of the process, he's creating Superman. And we sort of lose track of that the longer we've had Superman for culturally. And I like how the show kind of got right back into that of like, Superman doesn't have to exist. Clark Kent has to choose to make that happen.
Yeah.
They really hammer into that in the ending of the season with the specific like repetition of the idea of like choices.
Yeah.
It makes him such an interesting foil to Batman, who had no choice in existing, basically. It's like, oh, Clark Kent chooses to be Superman. Bruce Wayne is forced to be Batman, basically.
It's like 9-year-old Bruce Wayne is like, well, buckle up, criminals.
Yeah. I don't remember which comic it was, but I saw one that was putting those two in parallel, and they were each talking about how the other one chose to become a great person and like didn't have to. Like Batman's like, he could have been a god, but instead
I think that was...
was that New 52? I remember it was from like a run that we didn't like.
Recent. It was when they were doing the Catwoman.
Yeah, that
one, right?
Like, where they introduce each other.
Yeah. I did think that one specific framing was very cool, where it's like each of them individually is like, well, I had to do the right thing, but from the outside perspective, they look at the other and they're like, wow, you could have fucked this up in so many ways.
Well, that's because they can see the potential that each one has broadly, but that inner core of who they are. Like, while they might be questioning it, like the recurring question of that Clark has is, who am I, throughout this whole thing? But like, that's not really in question in this whole thing. Like, sure, his origins are what he is, like all those things, but like Clark Kent is very defined from the get-go, from the first scene, and like at no point does that deviate.
Which I think is a very bold choice for Superman, a character that every writer in the past 20 years has been like, but what's his moral breaking point that would make him stop being Clark Kent? It's like, he shouldn't have one of those. Why do you keep putting one of those in there?
Just give him a really bad day.
Yeah, as we all know. Famously reliable narrator, the Joker's thesis on humanity.
Reliable thesis that was disproven in the issue where it was introduced.
Yeah. Red, I think you had said this earlier. I'm pulling out all of your good points to frame the discussion before we get into the episodes themselves. But
betrayal.
The title of My Adventures with Superman, it's Clark's Adventures with Superman. It's like you read it first and it's like, what, is this Lois talking? But it's Clark's Adventures with the notion of being the character of Superman.
Yeah, that was my interpretation. I'm not 100% sure that was the intention, but considering that Clark is the main focus character and Lois is always a little bit on the outside of that, my read on that is that in that has to be Clark Kent.
Another interpretation could be Jimmy, considering that it's Jimmy just like at the end of the episode and is the one kind of exploring everything.
That's true.
But I don't think it really matters because the three of them as really good friends is a really fun component, and seeing how each one of them takes something from the existence of Superman in this world. And like, while Clark, it's him, it still helps him define how he sees himself and like what he thinks his role is.
Yeah, I think that creating the persona of Superman kind of gives him a way to exist where he doesn't feel like he's doing it wrong, because he spends so much of the show being like, oh, there's something deeply wrong with me. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm definitely not normal. And then it's like, well, what if I just did that on purpose? What if I just committed to the bit, styled my hair a little different, and then it wouldn't be so weird that I could fly, because I wouldn't be a normal guy who could fly. I'd be Superman who can fly.
The superheroification of lean in.
One thing I wanted to bring up before we get into the overall show is that this is a reinvention of Superman in a way that I haven't seen a lot. A lot of things will be like, here's the twist that we're putting on it, here's like our specific take. But this one, so many elements of it are like, all right, well, what if we throw out what the conventions are? What if we throw out the norms? Like, it's a lightning person who has lightning powers and they can turn into lightning. And like, well, what if it's tech? What if instead of Parasite being this specific character, we manipulate it around so that we can have this like larger like thesis of the whole thing, sort of like work together in this like shared world that they're constructing. Everything is rebuilt with this very anime-esque kind of thing in a way that I think is really good.
Yeah, I think that they've pulled off something pretty interesting here. And I actually think it's sort of consolidated in one of the early episodes, which brings in Mixelpict or whatever, and brings up just overtly like, hey, there's a multiverse. And initially I was like, oh God, please don't. I've made my thoughts on the multiversification of superhero comics very clear. But I actually think it was kind of genius, because what they do with that is be like, all those other Supermen, they're out there. They're fine. They're valid. They're not this one, though. We're doing our own thing. And I think that's genius, because that means it can be, we don't need to be like, oh, when are they going to hit this touch point or this touch point? Or are they going to do like Justice Lord Superman? It's like, Justice Lord Superman's just over there. He's being terrible. Yeah. We're not going to deal with that. He's over there. They lost the coordinates for this universe. We're never going to see these guys again, probably. Yeah. And I actually found that very reassuring, because that means they were plugging a hole in the plot that I was a little bit worried about. Whenever you bring in something DC, it's like, how soon before we start talking about Earth 2 or Earth Prime? And they were like, no, none of that. This is its own thing.
Yeah.
Shoot.
A very conscious choice to say, like, we acknowledge this, and we are not participating in it.
And because that takes this story out from having to be the Superman story, like if you tell a story without acknowledging that there are other Superman stories, it kind of feels like you have to hit every single touch point. It's like he has to fight this guy, he has to fight this guy, he has to do these things in this order, we have to unpack this. And in this case, it's just like, no, those stories are all over there. This is this own thing. And I thought that was a very interesting, efficient way to tighten up the story in a very helpful fashion.
Yeah, it feels very unfettered. We've talked a lot about how much we love the 90s animated series on the show. But that one still feels like we have to build all the big pieces and get to like, this is the classic Superman, just our take on it, versus this one is like, well, we can kind of just do what we want to do and sort of like find the things that we like and put them in the right pieces. And then interpret it all through a much more modern kind of pop culture lens than what like the original Superman was coming out with, where his design is like a circus strongman kind of aesthetic to him all. Like all the features of it are like building on what was pop culture in 1938 versus here we're looking at in, 2023. And it's like, okay, well, the pop culture we're going to reference is like, there's a lot of big tech stuff that sort of feels very specific. There's a lot of like, here's how the military works. It's very specific. There's a Roswell kind of thing going on here. And then the designs for everything, I mentioned the anime stuff, like it looks straight up mecha. Like it looks like Evangelion.
Yeah, it definitely does, especially Ivo Parasite thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Anime boy, magical girl transformation, Superman fighting Gundams and kaiju.
I like it a lot. I loved what they did.
It's like a Dragon Ball Z character.
Yeah. I know. It's so perfect.
And I loved how it was like, oh, his little bowler hat. Oh, it's turned into a much more aesthetically appropriate crown.
Right.
Yeah.
Like fantastic stuff. And then we also get a lot of like updates that are appropriate considering, a better representation of how the world actually looks. Like they do a lot of race bending in ways that I'm generally speaking pretty good with. Like they make Lois Korean. I think that's a cool like little step there. It doesn't feel out of whack, but like it is definitely true. Like it's culturally appropriate, the outfit she wears. Great stuff. Yeah. Jimmy Bean Black has the one caveat that's a little bit weird, which is that the ginger is always the one that is made black. And that's the only part I find a little bit weird about it. And it's only because that's a trope.
There's... I am instantly seeing into the Matrix. There's a lot to unpack with that.
Oh God, was that
like
a pop
seeing
moment?
Through the code.
Oh wow,
No,
I'm never going to unsee this in my entire life.
that one and the weird connection of black characters with lightning powers are like the two that are like kind of weird.
that I
And
knew
then you
about.
look at like the recent redo of Legion of Superheroes where Lightning Lad, the ginger with lightning, was turned into the black character on the team, and it's just like
what is happening?
And again, I don't actually like. There's no problem with changing these. It's just weird that it always is.
Yeah, what does it mean?
The reason, frankly, is that the ginger was always like the minority in the group back when it was like all white.
Yeah.
No, you're right, though, actually.
Yeah, I mean, because larger discussion, until like the 1950s, Irish was not white.
Right. Well, yeah. So like, there's weird stuff going on there too. Like, but I freaking love this Jimmy. So like,
I love this Jimmy so much.
There's
That's Jimmy easily.
nothing is wrong with any of this. It's just like it's a weird observation.
It's just
this
like
wasn't the first show to make Jimmy black, because they did that in Supergirl too.
Right.
So like, this wasn't even their idea necessarily.
Again, it's totally fine. It's not the first time either, but it's just like, oh yeah, that's a little weird.
Such a weird pattern. Why does it keep happening?
I love the News Kids being an actual part of this. Like the Newsboy Legion is such a Depression era Jack Kirby kind of thing, and they're like updated in a way that's like, yeah, this is fun and works really well.
Yeah, I like how it's silly, but it's silly in the way that like a bunch of kids that came up with a club, it would be silly. Like it becomes diegetically dumb.
And it's also just extremely endearing where like on the surface it was like, oh, how silly, whatever. And even Lois is like, okay, guys, come on. And then they assert themselves like, no, we're in this story, damn it. And it's like, okay, you know what? Fair enough. Yeah. And then they help.
They help out a lot.
The instances.
Yeah. The joke characters always help. I have a lot of notes about Jimmy constantly being the reason that the day is saved.
Yeah.
I also like the running gag that everything Jimmy conspiracy theories about, he's correct.
I know!
Every single thing he says is true.
I mean, there's a couple tangents that don't quite match up because there's like where he'll like throw out a couple theories about a thing, but like almost everything and everything he's like adamant about is absolutely correct.
Yeah.
As soon as he was like super intelligent apes, I was like, oh no, wait, I need to be paying attention because these are all correct.
I do want to mention before we get too far in the voice cast.
Yeah.
I love Jack Quaid as this character of Superman. It feels perfect for this like young Superman trying to find his place.
Yeah.
But the one I really wanted to call attention to, just because it's so weird, but like somehow is so perfect, is Chris Parnell as Slade Wilson.
People hated that one.
Yeah. I had no idea that was Chris Parnell. Holy crap.
Yeah, like fantastic use of an actor who has a very distinct voice, but normally is playing such a different type.
Yes.
And to take it on Slade Wilson, who this is a very specific interpretation of Deathstroke the Terminator. Like
I love everything about. Look, everyone who was losing their mind over this, you have to remember this is early days of the DC universe. All of Slade's future nemeses are in diapers right now. This is the face of a man who is about to become aggressively divorced.
But I love this idea of a smarmy Slade Wilson.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It fits very well for his whole vibe. Like Slade's entire gimmick is just being frighteningly competent and like a little bit super soldierified. The only reason he works and can like hold his own in the world of superheroes is that he's just too damn good. So introducing him young, cocky, and as an anime pretty boy, I think is fucking hilarious.
Right. Yep.
It's like, look, he's dangerous, but he's not where he's gonna be later. Like maybe dealing with Superman day one is gonna be what kicks him into high gear and makes him a credible threat.
It's such a weird casting choice, but so perfect. And like the design, they hint at the lost eye by having his hair like over his eye, anime pretty boy-esque as it is. Like it's so good.
As soon as I saw him, I was like, oh God, tell me that's Slade, please.
I love like the takes on most of the characters in this. Like Perry White, I think is fantastic as being like, you guys are interns, just shut up and leave.
Very reasonable authority figure.
Go get coffee, make me copies. Yeah. Like stop chasing stories.
It's so cute that like he's trying to play tough, but he has such like an endearment towards these three poor idiots who are in his care as the interns at the Daily Planet, where like he can't help but respect them, even though he's like, oh my God, shut up, leave, get out of my office, we're done.
There's something very funny to me about how like all of the older adults in the show look at the main trio and are like, oh, children, cool.
Right.
Like in terms of an interpretation of Clark, Lois, and Jimmy, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like Jimmy less so because he sometimes is like a full-on kid, but yeah, with Clark and Lois, and having Jimmy be their same age and all of them being like 22, I think is like kind of perfect, because it's like, oh yeah, you're supposed to be an adult now, but at the same time, like, no, you're right, the whole world sees them as kids. Like, when I interact with like a 22-year-old, I'm like, oh, you child. When I interact with like a 25-year-old, I'm like, oh, you child.
There is also, I've seen a few people point out that, like, you know, back in the 30s or 40s, it's like if you were 22, you probably could have, you know, a reporter job, and like the Great Depression did happen somewhere in there. But, you know, like theoretically outside of that, the way that the economy has completely shifted, and like the expectations of housing and employment means that like 22, fresh out of college, you are going to be an intern. You are not going to be a reporter. Sorry, that's just how it works now. But that's not how it worked when the characters were initially conceived. So I think a few people were like, why are these guys so much less accomplished than their like Great Depression era counterparts?
And I even like that they touch on that in the multiverse episode where Lois is like, what the fuck do you mean these other Loises are doing all this stuff?
You got a Pulitzer at 23?
Yeah.
How does that even happen?
Again, the world is just very different from the way Superman was when he was first created.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, why don't we get into the actual episodes? Because we've got 10-ish episodes to talk about. The first 2 are the one story pilot. So I've seen listings where it's like there's 9 episodes, and other where it's 10. It's that the pilot is a double length episode. So Adventures of a Normal Man. We open the episode like obviously with like great symbolism of a Superman symbol kite being stuck in the tree, which I think is just kind of fun there.
It's cheeky.
And then we set up the whole thing that's going to be this recurring element that I know a lot of people online complained about, but I freaking loved, which was the Dragon Ball Z-esque like power surge shonen hero moment.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that, because it's definitely framed in such a way that it's supposed to invite question, because it's not part of Superman's like known repertoire of abilities. Seems like it's probably something weird that has not been explained throughout the entire season. So like,
it doesn't show up in the entire back half.
No, it does very briefly.
Really?
Yeah. He gets one power surge in 0 Day Part 1, but it's not enough to, you got to watch the eyes. But I think it's interesting, and I have questions about it, and I have a couple theories about it, but I think the fact that it hasn't been addressed or explained is good. They do a very good job of sort of slowly building up, or like answering questions that reveal more questions. And I think that's a big one, that just Clark doesn't know enough to question what the hell is going on, because we know that's not normal for Superman, but he doesn't.
Right, and also he doesn't necessarily even see the effect that's happening. Like when his eyes glow blue, does he even know? The way I took it was that this was sort of like a quantum leap kind of, where like his actual power tier is kind of like breaking forth, because he's not able to fly, and then all of a sudden he can fly, and he can fly freely when he does the first like jump there. It seems that with these like power unlocks that occur, it's almost like in like a role-playing game, like a World of Warcraft or something, where it's like you leveled up and like there's a big flash and then it kicks in. But in this case, there's a personal motive pushing that flash.
It does seem like every time it happens, it's not like a temporary power-up. It permanently unlocks a new level of power, which I think is a very cool way to frame it, because traditionally Superman has overall gotten more powerful as he's grown, starting off with no power and then getting more power. But I like how they're doing it in discrete leaps, and it is always motivated, usually by him trying to help people, which makes me think, just my crack theory, I think Jor-El did something. I think this is a Jor-El scheme of some kind. I don't know what it is, but that's my feeling. It's like, oh, you only get powers if you do good things. I don't know. Feels like a dad thing to do, you know?
Yeah, like some kind of like mental blocks or something on him to prevent him.
Or it could be something else. It could be like, we don't know how strong the average Kryptonian is in this setting. We haven't seen runners, so like we don't really have a baseline to compare to.
So he saves this woman and her baby who are like careening off the road with this like burst of energy, and he like stops the car, and that's where he asks himself like, who am I? And like then we see he's able to fully fly and grab the kite that he was having trouble with. And then we kind of jump forward to him actually trying to acclimate to the world. We set up the whole, like, he's living with Jimmy, which I think is a really fun kind of convention there, that Jimmy officially doesn't know.
Quote unquote.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that Clark is just destroying everything in their apartment in that, like, first day sequence.
Yeah.
This is a minor thing, but I actually really love how they did Clark's super strength in this show, and that, like, it feels like just a thing that his body does. This is something I've thought about on occasion. Like, anytime I, like, pull a push door, I'm like, boy, it's a good thing I have normal levels of human strength so that as soon as I feel resistance, I can stop. Because if I were stronger and I just pulled this off the hinges every time I pushed something that wasn't supposed to get pushed, that's not a way that they normally frame Clark. And, like, it got some lip service in the 90s Justice League, of course, because he's got the world of cardboard speech. But in this case, you actually see, like, oh, yeah, you actually do live in a world of cardboard. And anytime you, like, push a button or turn a lever or open a door, there is a chance you're just going to completely flatten it, because the difference in strength required to do those things is so fine.
I forget what episode it is, but it starts off, there's like some heavy box in the closet at the Daily Planet where Lois is like, this is...
Oh, yeah.
Once you will believe a man can lie, I think.
It's like it's full of weights and nonsense, and Lois is like, oh my gosh, and Clark's like, oh, here, let me get this out of the way, and just like lifts it up, puts it on top, and it just like crushes the filing cabinet he sets it down on.
It's because Clark didn't see her picking it up, so he doesn't know how heavy it's supposed to be. I like that it kind of makes his strength and his speed to an extent just feel like properties of how he exists and moves rather than something he can switch on and off.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. It's a very solid way to do it.
So then we get a sequence of him jogging, and he's like talking about how he has to be as normal as he possibly can. And then they open the show with him saving a cat.
I had to save the cat.
Yeah.
I had to save the cat.
Yeah, no, legit. You had to save the cat. But at the same time, like the show had to show him save the cat.
And not the only time, I think. They mention it in a later episode in like his rush of running around. You think he saved another cat.
Superman saves a lot of cats.
But I just love it here because like there's the Save the Cat screenwriting school of thought that I think was directly influencing that specific scene where, no, I had to save the cat. Yeah, no, of course, because you're Superman. Like, you have to save the cat.
Yeah.
And then we sort of set up the initial thing. Like, so he meets Lois, first up buying donuts, which I love the setup of him having such a giant appetite.
Yeah. I mean, he was also buying them for the office because it was his first day and he wanted to make a good impression. But also, I mean,
that whole
burns a lot of calories in there.
That whole little scene with him at the shop was hilarious. Oh, Clark, did you get your bib? Did he get his bib?
I like that it was clearly contrived to be like the absolute most embarrassing meet cute ever, but also the most endearing from the outside perspective.
It's like, oh, he fixed the door for them. He does like all the stuff for them. He has this like great relationship with them.
And I think that also like it automatically endears us to Clark because we're like, oh, he's just a big dork. But then it endears us to Lois because it's like, oh, she thinks he's a big dork too. This is great.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if she were meaner, she could have been mean about anything that happened there. And instead she's just like, oh, this guy's adorable.
Yeah. And I love that we don't like just mess around with her being like disgusted by Clark. Like she's instantly like, no, he's this like 6'5" Adonis who is like super nice.
Just this absolute hunk. Obviously, I'm going to be all over that. 220 pounds of Kansas beef.
God.
Yeah, like the meet cute element of it. There's a lot of like shonen feeling on it, like just in general in this show. And the fact that they've got this sort of like cute relationship, but they're not quite willing to like fully commit to it until honestly, they both have kind of bared their souls with each other. Like really nice progression for this whole thing. And the fact that like they both have reasons for the other one to like be mad at them at various times that kind of like keep it working pretty well.
Oh man, yeah. The way they handle their characters in conflict, I think is incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of like when the characters are unconditionally on the same side and do like each other and still have points of crucial disagreement. And they manage to hit that with every single character like duo in this entire show. And I think that's really good.
Yeah. We first get our first real hint about Livewire, who they don't establish as Livewire in this episode, but we'll find that out, and it's easier than me trying to remember that her name is Leslie. Livewire. We get the hint about her stealing the garbage trucks, and this sort of like sets up a thing that the show is very good about, which is a lot of setup and payoff. Like there are so many sequences that we find out more, or that they use as reporters to piece together the solutions, which has this investigative quality to it that I think some Superman material lacks, but is a really important part about him being a news reporter.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of stories that kind of gloss over the Clark Kent job stuff because it's less visually exciting than the Superman adventure stuff. Or we'll just kind of be like, Clark has super hearing and can see through walls. His investigative journaling is on easy mode. And I like how that's just not the case in this show. It's like, oh, you think those will solve all your problems? No.
Yeah.
It's like with, Batman is the world's greatest detective. And the bad Batman media is the Batman media that forgets that. Or like what people love about Spider-Man is that the story is just as much about Spider-Man as it is about Peter Parker. And I feel like this show is maybe one of the only iterations or adaptations of a Superman story where Clark Kent, as Clark Kent, who he feels more comfortable being, is just as important to what's going on in the plot as Superman. And what I was pointing out to Red the other day is that it feels like a lot of times the plots that Clark is doing as a reporter are often in conversation with and in parallel with whatever's going on with Superman. So like later on, we have the episode where the city turns on Clark for 15 seconds because he messed up a truck, which is in line with Vicky Vale wanting to write this expose. So the, real person reporter plot line mirrors and supports the Superman plotline. Same thing happens with let's all go to Ivo Tower, where the reporter aspect of what's going on is fundamentally linked with that plot, and seeing the two of them always play together is always so satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that this version of the story definitely highlights that Clark Kent is the core of Superman and cannot be neglected in a Superman story, which I think is good. And it's interesting because we've gotten shows that kind of pick a side before. Like most of the animated ones focus almost entirely on Superman and will only occasionally be like, Clark is doing a thing. And then the live action shows, for probably budgetary reasons, often focus more on Clark or like Superman doing non-Superman things that are easier to, VFX up. And this show, being animated, can kind of just do whatever it wants. So it's like, we got Clark, we got Superman, we got quick changes between Clark and Superman. Let's do it.
I think they also do a good job of balancing the different types of reporter that Clark, Lois, and Jimmy are. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes that's an issue. Like Superman and Lois, I love, but Lois is the reporter on the show because that's her shtick. And she's a great reporter. She's a pro. She's such a good reporter that people like love her and are excited when she shows up because she's this award-winning reporter. And like Clark is too, but like no one really talks about that in that project. Yeah. Here, Clark has his own type of thing. Lois is not that good of a reporter yet. Like she's, she'll get there, but they're all nascent. And then Jimmy has, the conspiracy theory stuff and the Flamebird stuff and like all the stuff. We're going to talk about Flamebird.
YouTuber Jimmy Olsen. As soon as he said Flamebird, I was like, I have to Google this.
I loved it so much when they brought. Okay, we'll talk about Flamebird for a second because oh my god, I love that they went with that. It's so good.
God, it's so funny.
All right, so for people who are not familiar with the lore of Flamebird in Superman stuff, Flamebird is the superhero identity that Jimmy Olsen would go under when he and Superman would travel into the bottled city of Kandor, where Superman would take on a Batman-style persona because they were in a Krypton type environment, so he had no powers, and he went under the name Nightwing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Flamebird was his Robin.
And what I love about this is, like, this is such a weird little cul-de-sac of comics canon that most adaptations can't do, because it's like, how much explanation do you need to do to explain the bottle city of Kandor in the first place? And then be like, hey, Superman, here's Superman's other superhero identity. Like, there's so many layers, but this is why Nightwing is called Nightwing. Yes. Like, he picked the name specifically to be like, yeah, in homage to Superman's, like, civilian Batman superhero identity. And, like, without that, the explanation is just that Robin was like, I think Nightwing sounds pretty cool, guys. What do you think?
Yeah, no, like the Nightwing identity was always like here, like Superman was always such a role model for him. That's the whole world's finest. Superman, Batman, and Robin playing baseball kind of stuff. It's like, oh yeah, no, it's like, it's my two dads.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's like, well, I can't call myself Batman. That would just be confusing. And I can't call myself Superman. That's false advertising. But
Well, it's better than like the weird Robin costumes of Earth 2 that would show up, like the Batman costume, but with a giant R on the bat was one, or like the weird adult Robin costume.
It just never goes well.
But the thing is, because Nightwing is like one of the few successful handoffs of a secret identity for a major character, especially one who'd been around since the 30s or 1940, I think is when Robin first showed up. Yeah. But like it owns Nightwing in a way that like very few other identity changes have, and thus makes it really difficult to explain Flamebird because it's like, well, what if you just had Robin, but also Kryptonian Robin, like, as a separate thing?
And it was Jimmy Olsen, BT Dubs.
Right. But I love it. It's such a perfect vehicle for a specific type of journalism. It's a discussion of social media in there. It's all the stuff going on there. It allows for the alien conspiracy stuff to be like exposed, or at least to us exposed, I should say. It's so fun. I love the icon being a fiery bird UFO.
It's so cute. I love everything about it. And of course, like, we'll get to the episode later, but like with hindsight, there's a lot of stuff about Jimmy that becomes very funny. And I do like one of the clips we saw of Flamebird where he was like, do aliens walk among us? And then Clark walks in like, Jimmy, what are you doing in the dark? He trips over something. And I was just like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted from Superman and Jimmy Olsen being roommates.
I also really like that whenever he says Flamebird, there's the little in the background that they do. But also just like in the context of like working on YouTube as our job, the episode where Jimmy's like, I got 1 million followers. I'm like, I'll have you know that takes years, Mr. Olsen. It's not that easy.
Yeah, I had that little moment where I was like, oh, they got 5 million. We've got 2 million. I'm not jealous. That's fine.
All right, maybe.
I mean, to be fair, if you got the only footage of like of Superman or something.
God.
God.
I also just love that, like, because Jimmy Olsen is the photographer. It's a good, like, baseline for the character, and that's still true. But I also really like that they were just like, Jimmy needs more stuff to do. YouTuber. Just the endless comedic possibilities.
Yeah. I mean, is it YouTuber or TikToker, though, really?
Flamebird is for YouTube, but he does go live vertical at the end of the show. So
it's generic social media,
but perhaps that for whatever reason has horizontal and vertical video on it.
Technically, so does YouTube now. So yeah, shorts and shit.
You're right. I just forgot that YouTube Shorts existed.
Right.
Come on, man. Oh gosh, yeah. No, I love how they're doing Jimmy, and everything about Flamebird is so funny, and just. So much of this just adds texture to the show because it gives the characters more stuff to do. Because obviously Clark is always going to have stuff to do. He's the main guy. And hooking Lois into like the Superman question, I mean, she always has stuff to do. And then with Jimmy, it's like sometimes he's intersecting with the plot. Sometimes he's off hunting Bigfoot. And I love that. That's genius. Yeah. He's never on the shelf and he's never bored.
And everything he does actually does advance the plot at any given time, even if it is this like off tangent and you're like, oh, that has to be something totally different. Like he finds where they're storing the robots. Like he's the one like, I mean, basically every episode there is a major moment where Jimmy allows for things to continue going forward.
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
no point is he ineffective in terms of like moving the story forward.
Yeah, the action economy in this show is great.
It's so good. That's just one thing I absolutely love. So we cut to Livewire's like criminal underworld gang having stolen all this like military tech.
Yeah, military tech, as we will learn.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually sort of a fun detail on this one, which is like the military tech, like the world is advanced. The computers they have are all like tablets that project a screen up. Even Perry's like desktop computer is like a stand that has like a holographic translucent screen or something. But we see enough like floating screen tech in this that the world is like weirdly advanced. So we see these robots, and when the robots pop up, they activate it by accident the first time. It looks anime as hell. Like I said, it looks like Evangelion. It looks like all this stuff. But you know what it also kind of looks like in terms of its basic layout? It looks like the 90s Kryptonian armor that Superman would rock, like around like the Death and Return of Superman era. Like giant purple armor.
Yeah. It's got that sort of angular.
Like it was more rounded in the comics, but it's got similar kind of dimensions to it, which I find kind of fun. And it's just sort of like, it looks classically mecha, but it's also thoroughly Superman.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the way that they sort of integrate everything stylistically in this show is really impressive, especially considering how much they use 3D models, which can be very difficult to convincingly integrate into a 2D animated series. But like later when we meet Musumala and the Brain, it's like, oh, Brain is a 3D model. I didn't even notice until like they zoomed in really close and I saw the edges of the polygons, like that kind of thing. So like that's the level of like, oh, they're really pulling this off that I think is very cool.
In terms of good setup and payoff, like when later Clark, Lois, and Jimmy like find the bunker where they had been storing it beforehand, they find a jacket there, which like sets up like where it might be. But that also sets up the jacket for like Superman knows that they're at that location, so he can grab one to be a disguise when he has to reveal himself. Is really fun. I rewatched the show in preparation for this episode. And I rewatched it all in one night, and it was like really fun just to be like, oh, here. Well, because it was like 5 hours on a Friday night. It's not like that crazy, but like,
it's true.
But
I watched Castlevania at night a couple weeks back.
But especially because I was like in note-taking mode, and it wasn't like in one sitting, but it was over the course of the night. And it was like fun just being like having already seen it where it's like, oh, that thing, I know that he's going to wear that jacket later. Oh, they're setting up that he's aware of these details around as well. That like building out this world was a really like fun element for the show. And that like there's so much. We're going to set this thing up early so that we can pay it off later. Like we set up the way they accidentally turn on the robot and how she turns it off later so that we can set up that Lois will turn off the robot that exact same way, so that we can keep having these actions. So it's not like, how do we stop the robot? I don't know. And then have to like invent a scene for it. Like, oh, well, no, we already know how to do it. Like, again, like we were saying, the economy of storytelling is really strong.
And they do a pretty good job of making it so that the solution isn't just hit it harder, because they do convincingly make it clear that like, okay, just beating one of these was really hard. So beating 10 of them is not conservation of ninjutsu easier. It's actually going to be 10 times harder, possibly more.
It's incredible if the show manages to avoid the conservation of ninjutsu problem specifically, because normally it'd be like, oh, well, now that I found the one weakness, I can kick all these robots' asses, no problem.
Yeah. It kind of helps that Superman doesn't really have heat vision yet.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not to a major degree, because usually it'll be like, oh, okay, 10 robots, let me just laser them all in half with my face. Like, we're not there yet. And I think that that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, and like the level up system that Superman has plays into that too, because he doesn't have all of his super senses in the first episode. He doesn't have all this stuff going on. So in this fight, which is a very classic opening to a Superman series kind of fight. It felt very much like the Max Fleischer cartoons, the robot fights. The animated series from the 90s, the first episode, it's Metallo, but he's in a mech. He's not in robot body at that point. Yeah. If you look at the New 52, the Grant Morrison stuff, the first like super fights he deals with are robots. Like robots are very classic Superman fighting fare, but these are anime as fuck robots, which is great.
Yes.
And they're appropriately difficult for him to fight, and we find out why they're appropriately difficult over the course of the series. And like that's really cool. It's a good threat that eventually is not the main threat, because like the tech gets better and Superman gets better. Everyone's leveling up this whole goddamn series. It's so cool.
Yep. And I do like that because they introduced the level up system pretty early. It's like, okay, so if Superman starts getting overwhelmed, he might get a power up, but he also might not. And it might not be enough to make it trivial to win whatever he's doing. And it doesn't really feel like a soft magic system, as it were, because like we don't really know what facilitates it, but it clearly has rules, which makes it seem like he can't just power up to get good enough to do whatever threat he needs to face, which is a big problem with a lot of soft power systems. It feels mysterious and poorly understood, not whatever the writer needs it to be, which is a very important distinction.
There's a very small and fundamentally simple set of rules. We just don't really know them.
Mm-hmm. We can guess. It seems to be whenever he does a good thing to protect other people, but that might just be narratively. Yeah. Like that doesn't actually tell us anything.
I love when Superman makes his reveal to Lois and Jimmy. First of all, I love that we set up very early on, like him doing like the Clark Kent feint of being like knocked into some boxes. Then he gets up later, and it's like a good way of like keeping the secret identity, because they actually do a nice time having that little dance at the beginning of the series of like, oh yeah, no, Clark Kent and Superman are totally different people, right? But when he catches the robot fist that's about to crush Jimmy and Lois, it is the perfectly timed comedic moment of Jimmy snapping the picture. And that just sort of reminds you that the show is going to be really funny all the time. Like even in these like cool action sequences.
Oh yeah.
During that fight, I really like one thing they do with how Superman flies. He's got this kind of like weightless kind of like floatiness to it. When he's like avoiding the laser blast, he kind of like spins around it. He does a barrel roll in midair. Yeah. And what I like about that is it's very different from the sort of like rocket powered kind of look that we see a lot in superhero stuff. Like,
oh yeah.
He's not just like shooting about. He's like literally floating around, like evading things in this like weightless kind of sequence, which we were saying like it's animated. They can get away with it with like CG Superman, with like Superman and Lois. Like he can fly in and superhero land all the time because that's like one stock animation that they just use. Like it's like a big blur effect and then he's in the scene. But like they rarely have him just kind of like floating around doing stuff unless it's like, oh, I just floated up in the air to reveal that I'm Superman. And then they don't do more with the scene.
And if you put him in the air, he's still going to be affected by gravity just because gravity works. Whereas in an animation medium, you can just be like, his hair is floaty, his jacket is floaty. It looks like gravity is just not affecting him right now.
To your point, Case, it feels like in this version, like Superman's propulsion almost comes from his core, which is why he's able to like spin around in certain ways, as opposed to some interpretations of Superman, kind of like in Justice League, where he basically flies as if he has rocket boots on. And that's a very different kind of trajectory and propulsion that he has. So I like this more graceful, like he spins. It's a little more of a dance quality to it, which means he can do more interesting stuff in flight than just like go in a straight line wherever his feet are pointing.
Yeah, it's not propulsion and it's not telekinetic, because like there are versions where it's like, oh, he's just kind of like lifting himself up. Like it feels like he's negating gravity and then having some kind of thrust, but it's not. The reason why he's flying isn't the reason why he's moving.
Yeah. And I kind of like how this ties in with the thing I was talking about before with the way they do his super strength, which is that this just feels like a property of his body, not something he like remembers he can do exactly, if that makes sense. It's like sometimes he can just make it so that gravity just doesn't affect him anymore. And it's as easy for him as like walking across the room would be, which I think is cool, because the more natural his power set feels to him, the more Clark Kent's physical limitations feel like a strain to put on him. As like, oh yeah, to be mild-mannered Clark Kent, I can't just fly to the place that would be really convenient for me to fly. I have to walk there because normal man Clark Kent has to walk places, which I think is an interesting thing to bring up with this character because, of course, like we're all like, yeah, Clark Kent is the real version, but like Clark Kent has Superman's powers. Clark Kent is not a normal man. He is the real personality while Superman is the job that Clark Kent does. But Clark Kent, in order to pass in polite society, does have to basically restrict himself from doing like 95% of the things that come naturally to him. Given that the primary theme of the show is basically what it means to try and pursue normalcy and to fit in and to want to be like liked by people that are famously not great about liking people that are very different from them, I think that this is a very deliberate framing on his character. Which is why I'm kind of glad that this show bites the bullet pretty quickly on the identity reveal thing. Because this version of Clark, I think it's very important that he has friends that actually like everything about him, rather than just parts of him that he chooses to show.
Yeah, no, there's
sense.
a reason why the opening credits, it's Clark with Lois and Jimmy at his side.
Mm-hmm.
It's that trio. Like they're all important to this. They're all the main characters of the show, even if Clark is Superman.
Right.
So we have the whole fight. Lois is able to save the day sort of by like deactivating all the robots. Like that's like a really fun thing that they set up pretty quickly. And then we get the whole thing with them showing the pictures to Perry and him being like, these are terrible pictures. I can't use any of them.
Because you think it's going to be that triumphant first moment of like, oh my gosh. And it's like, no, they do a similar thing in Spectacular Spider-Man. Like, get a better camera, Parker.
Right.
What are you doing?
But then we also get the like this like ultimate like pilot kind of setup sequence right afterwards where they leave the office and it's like, well, we have to find out who Superman is. Like we have to like hunt him down. We have to reveal everything.
I love the way they wrote Lois in this show because she is so enthusiastic. She's a bull in a china shop. It is so funny. Everything that Clark has like trepidations about is completely understandable because Lois is like, I'm going to ferret out all of his secrets and expose them to the world. And Clark is like, but what if you didn't, maybe? like later down the line when she's like, I can't believe you didn't trust me with this. He was like, you said you were going to tell everybody my secrets. And she's like, well, I wasn't gonna if it was you. And it's like, Lois, honey, I'm sorry, but he was completely right to not tell you.
Yeah.
And I like that. Obviously, like a lot of times when you're getting writing advice, it's like, make sure your characters are flawed. And people are like, okay, take a character, make something wrong with them. And it's like, no. This is a really good example of like two characters who are perfectly like nice and benevolent people who have conflicting character flaws that put them at odds with each other in this very subtle way, where Lois is like got this pathological hatred of lies and deception and truths being concealed even. It's like, oh, just not telling me the truth is the same thing as lying to me, which is clearly a personal issue for her for reasons that we can probably infer based on things that show up later in the show. But like, she's not being framed as being 100% morally correct about this. Like, she feels hurt that Clark did not tell her the truth, but the reason she feels so hurt, so disproportionately from the situation, is because of a character flaw of hers. And meanwhile, his complete unwillingness to tell her this, which would have, stopped her from feeling this way, is caused by his own fear of his powers and what they represent about his desire to simply fit in and not be alone, which is also a character flaw on his end. And I just think that's really interesting because they take these characters and are like, they have completely opposing personal issues, and the way they interact puts them at odds with each other through nobody's fault. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's set up when we first are introduced to Lois because we get Clark's whole, like, today's the day I'm going to be, like, a normal guy. And then it's like, I'm going to be extraordinary today, is, like, when she wakes up. And it's such a juxtaposition between those two.
They're foils, Your Honor.
Oh, well, because, like, how they even got into the whole robot situation in the first place was because she tricked everybody.
Oh, yeah, we didn't
into going there.
Oh, my gosh.
I forgot the moment.
It was always funny when she's like, oh, my gosh, you lied to me. And he was like, wait a second. How did it? Wait a second.
Lied to me day one. I loved the moment where Clark found out that she'd been lying to them because he got like the scary anime shiny glasses. And he was literally just like, Lois, I'm very disappointed in you. Because, okay, this is something I didn't realize I needed until this show gave it to me. I don't think we ever see this version of Clark angry. He just gets upset and disappointed.
Yeah, he was like a disappointed dad. Like, oh, Lois, you lied to me. I can't believe you did that.
Yeah, exactly. He's not mad, he's disappointed. But like, again, like the 90s cartoon version, which we're all like, it's pretty superlative. It's like that version of Superman is angry a lot. And I, in hindsight, don't like that. I don't think that fits with the core of his character as much as I was okay with accepting at the time. And I think seeing this Clark get put through the absolute ringer and just get like slightly sadder and never crack. Like, even he's had a couple moments in the show where he goes like, all right, enough, people are getting hurt. And it's like, oh, is he angry? And it's like, no, he's efficient. That's a very different, much scarier thing. Yeah. And I just loved that moment as kind of like, oh, he has reason to be like, Lois, I can't believe this. Our jobs are in peril. But instead he's just like, Lois, you lied? Why would you do that? Yeah. I'm so disappointed in you.
It's not, again, it's not an anger thing. It's not like he feels particularly affronted. It's a case of like, how could Lois do this thing that was in his mind immoral?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's very cool that this Clark is like not happy to be manipulated, but is mostly just like, oh, I expected better of you. That makes me sad, which is much more devastating.
He feels betrayed, and he's disappointed, and he's frustrated. Mm-hmm. And then he's frustrated with himself. Like, the next scene, he's, like, recriminating, like, well, maybe I wouldn't have helped her. Like, and meanwhile, she's coming to the realization, oh, my God, Clark totally would have helped me because he's such a nice guy.
Yeah.
I do like that Clark does not know himself at all in this show. He's like, what if I really am a monster? And it's like, no, you're not. It's fine. Calm down. Relax, bro.
Early setup and then later pay off.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, we totally skipped that part. But that is such a good moment there of setting up. Like, Lois does the classic lie to, like, get them to go along with her plan and then get them into trouble kind of situation. Mm-hmm. But the way that Clark handles it is so good. And then everything that flows from there, like, that's why they get separated. Setting up that dynamic so that then at the end of the episode where we get the whole, like, yeah, we're gonna 7 seasons in a movie, like, sequence at the very end. Rick and Morty, yeah. The whole end of the episode of, like, we're gonna track down Superman, we're gonna take this whole thing, and, like, Lois and Jimmy are framed opposite Clark, and, like, they have their hands raised up over him, and he just, like, invisibly is trapped within their frame.
Yeah. It's good shot composition.
Yeah.
This is a version of Clark that is not too far off the beaten path, but, like, just framing him as like, hey, this is a person who can pass for normal if he's very, very careful and is very afraid of the consequences of being found out for his quote unquote abnormalities. That is fucking relatable for quite a lot of people. Like, you could read a queer allegory into it. You can read neurodivergence into it. There's so many parts of that specific narrative of like, well, there's something wrong with me and I don't know what it is, but I know that if people found out, they wouldn't like me. So I'm just going to be really, really good at pretending to be normal and everything will be fine. Is like, oh, that hits a little fucking close to home.
Like the masking component.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And especially because we've been discussing like all these components of his power set are framed in such a way that they are so just foundational to the way he moves through the world. Like, he is constantly aware of how much of an outsider he is. And then, like, the beginning of the first episode ends with his 2 new best friends being like, we're gonna rip this guy open and show the world what his insides look like. And he's just like, oh, good. I love this. I just think it's so powerful. And again, this ties in with like the way that they write the characters as just like completely true to their internal motivations in such a way that they are naturally brought into conflict with one another and then have to deal with that according to their internal conflict recoveries.
Again, just excellent characterization, excellent shot composition. Like, we just keep on saying the economy of storytelling here in terms of like the broader plot, but like the internal monologues for all these characters is handled so well throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm astounded that DC Studios can create something of this quality in the midst of like whatever the fuck the live action teams are doing right now. Like, the juxtaposition is baffling that this is basically the best Superman story that, to my mind, exists. Buried under, like, the DCU is floundering and we need to recast it. Like, the same company is doing this? Really?
I think it's like, quick, while they're distracted, sneak this on the radar.
Well, but I think that is also just the element of, this is a show that clearly wasn't the main focus for anything aside from the team working on the show.
Yeah.
This is such a side project.
God, I guess.
They are, I said unfettered before. This is not supposed to be, this is our canon multimedia Superman. This is a sideshow that they're putting out there on Adult Swim in this sort of like weird way that just happened to be really fucking good.
I think this was something where it's like, all right, this is little and weird and it's not going to cost that much. So if it crashes and burns after 1 season, we don't lose anything. It's fine. And then instead it was a breakout success because this is usually what happens when you, take a chance on a creative endeavor rather than funding something you think is a guaranteed win in the field of arts where nothing is a guaranteed win. Anyway, I'm happy it exists. I hope we get more of it.
I mean, this is a show that feels like there are no studio notes.
Yeah, there were a number of times where I was like, wow, they just really let them put anything into this, huh? We'll get to some of those in a few later episodes.
Let's move on to the second episode because we don't want to be here for forever, but I do want to talk about all this stuff.
Let's do it.
This is the second part of the pilot. So it picks up with Livewire's story now being kind of on the run from apparently the government, which is kind of a fun detail. But this is where the show really kicks in several big things that I think are important to why the show works overall. So for one thing, we get such a weird Jor-El.
I love how they do Krypton and everything Krypton adjacent in this show. As we learned in Tears of the Kingdom earlier this year, backwards voice choir is the most eerie element you can add to any musical score, and they have it all over the place with the Krypton stuff. I love how desaturated and colorless everything is. It feels like unreal and ghostly in a very strange way.
It kind of feels like the Phantom Zone.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's up with Jor-El, but I'm excited to find out, hopefully. And I think what this all does is produce a version of Krypton that Superman has never been more separated from. Yeah. And again, given that the whole purpose of this show is framing him as like, this is the story of an outsider, this is the story of an immigrant, this is the story of somebody trying to figure out who he is. And it's like, hey, here is the last relic of your cultural heritage. It's in a language you don't understand, and it's the scariest thing you've ever seen. And I think that is such an interesting core to build his character around, because Clark kind of goes through this little mini arc in the pilot where he goes from being basically terrified of using his powers to being like, okay, I can use them as Superman. Clark Kent will be a normal man and Superman will actually help people, and this will be great. I can get the best of both worlds. But this doesn't completely eradicate his character flaw of his fear of what it means to have these powers and where he comes from and all that stuff. It just kind of moves it like one notch up. So instead of being afraid of himself, now he's just kind of like, oh, this Kryptonian, he doesn't even know the word Krypton at this point.
No.
Just like, all of this is weird and frightening, but fortunately, I don't need to deal with it. I can bury it in a hole and not think about it. And this is portrayed as a flaw that he doesn't fully overcome by the end of the 2-part pilot. And I like that because we, the audience, who are expected to at least have a baseline understanding of Superman, are like, oh, I know who that is. That is Jor-El. That is his father. He's got all the information you might need. And then he starts talking. You're like, oh, no, Clark doesn't know what this guy's saying. And that is really fucking sad, surprisingly. Yeah. Just this alienation from, you know, his last fragment of his family. He doesn't even realize that's his dad.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's dramatic irony there, because if you watch it with subtitles, every line of Jor-El's is translated. The audience doesn't have to know what Jor-El is saying, but it is an option, which is just, I don't know, there's something very sad about that to me. And I think that's really interesting, of just this poor kid, last remnant of this planet as far as we know. And he can't even understand the words of the AI thing or whatever that this Jor-El is that was sent to help him. Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this, apparently.
You know, I think you mentioned that on your show, and I forgot to turn on subtitles on this rewatch because I would have liked to. But that said, I don't feel a lot of difficulty understanding contextually from me knowing that this is Jor-El, father of Superman. Like, there's a lot
you can read into it. And they do a good job with his body language, too, because I think Clark says something that basically makes it clear. He says something like, I don't even know who you are. And like Jor-El's like hologram like looks sad and says, I think like Philo. And it's like, clearly he is saying, bro, you're my son. What are you talking about? Now I'm sad again. But yeah, I didn't watch the early episodes with subs, but I did watch the later ones. So I got the last bits, but not the first part.
Given the philo, and it's like, that's great.
I was catching that too.
Yeah.
I feel
It's
like
just vaguely
what
Mediterranean.
they're doing is they're just smushing a couple different languages together, so no one person, even if they do speak those languages, would know what that is. But it's just kind of like a hodgepodge of different stuff that's like, you might subconsciously like catch the connotation of a word if you're familiar with the language, but you wouldn't be able to listen to it straight. I mean, this is me pulling it fully out of my ass. I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of the sense that I got, where I'm like, I hear a couple Greek words in here, but the rest of this is definitely other languages.
Oh god, it's minion speak.
Oh no.
But yes, I love the aesthetic for Krypton.
Yeah, no, I caught a couple of those Greek words in there too, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because like I only have like the vaguest familiarity with Greek because I was mostly Latin focused in college, but it still like stood out, and I was like, oh, and obviously there's so much language that like goes into ours that. Sorry, small quick tangent. So, long time ago, back before streaming was sort of like the default for everything, I was ripping a shitload of DVDs just so that I could have them on my computer for trips. Because like at the time I was living in New York, but I would like commute back to see my family in DC a lot. And so one time I was like watching a movie on my way back, and I realized that watching Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, it had not ripped the subtitles. So I was watching the opening like 20-ish minutes, which are completely in sign language without any actual language. And I was enamored with how well I could understand what was going on. And I felt similarly watching this, where it's like, okay, even if you're not getting the words, you're getting a lot of the impressions of what he's trying to say. You get that sadness from Jor-El. You get him trying to convey things to Clark. And you have that like spot where these two characters who, if they could understand each other, would be fine, just like clashing against each other because they can't get across that divide.
It's pretty clear that Jor-El can understand everything Clark is saying, which I think makes it worse because we, of course, as the audience, we have a fairly omniscient view of this. We have the dramatic irony. We want Clark to understand what Jor-El is saying because we know that Clark has a lot of misconceptions about himself, his powers, and what they mean. And Jor-El is right there. And it's like, come on, man, figure this out. Get your universal translator up and running already.
Yeah, and like it's not weird for Clark not to understand Kryptonian right when he first meets
that makes
Jor-El.
sense.
Like that has happened plenty of times. But usually it's like immediately followed by like some kind of like upload of here's all the data so that you can speak Kryptonian. And that just doesn't happen in this.
No, certainly not. That would be too easy.
I like that also they depict Jor-El flying, and Red, what you had referenced before, we don't really know what Kryptonians are capable of in this universe. Like, I wonder if we are getting rid of the whole they're not super when they're not on Earth, or at least to the same degree, because like he's depicted flying. The other character that is implied to be Kryptonian that we see later is shown also kind of in sort of a similar power level. So I am curious if that's going to be an element of this here, because like that is like very old school Superman, like where all Kryptonians are super, and they just had to get rid of that because eventually it was like, wait, if they're all super, why did they die?
Yeah. Also, this is the coolest Jor-El has ever looked.
Yeah.
He's got the eye patch and the crown and the luscious locks. It's great. We need this Jor-El more.
Flowing white cape and beard and just like,
Yeah. They were like, oh, sorry, where did you want this Odin delivered?
Thank you. I was about to say that.
One bar over the marble. Shoot. So cool.
Got the rocket ship Sleipnir. Yeah. So anyway, we pick up with Leslie on the run, and it's fun to sort of get the vibe that she is being stalked by some kind of force, and because whatever sort of government task force that is revealed to be Task Force X, the Suicide Squad, as it were, is sort of the main villain of this whole season. But getting that set up here is important because we need to be reminded that that's going to be a thing going on. I love the way that she takes them down, grabs the earbud, talks into it, and then we set up the meeting with Deathstroke ultimately.
God, this version of Deathstroke.
I love Deathstroke.
I can't stop looking at this man and thinking of his rapidly impending divorce.
Just remember, he's a bad dad.
He's bad at most things except fighting good guys.
Sorry, thinking about fighting. So we set up all that. And here's one thing that I think is really cool about the show, just in general. Set pieces.
Yeah.
We've kind of glossed over Clark going and getting his costume. I like that the costume is Kryptonian, but Martha has input. That's great. I love those deals.
It's a good marrying of the two various origins of like, here's your prefabricated suit. And Martha's like, Clark, kiddo, you need something nice to wear when you're running around.
I love that they put the underpants back on the outside. That, to my mind, is one of the best indicators of a show that's willing to let Superman be Superman, because if they're too good for the underpants on the outside, they're not going to let any of the other fun stuff happen either.
This is the Nando v. Movie school of does Superman need the trunks? And it's basically a litmus test for do the creators have on their end the emotional vulnerability to make a character who's wearing his underwear on the outside.
And also kind of very, very like on brand for Superman's mom to be like, oh, yeah, we're just going to put a little more coverage on that. There's nothing to worry about. Oh, you want to run around in okay, yeah, no, absolutely not. Here you go.
But also getting into the theme of Clark, it's saying like, this is what Superman is expected to be. This is what you're inheriting, but then you're also putting your own spin on it.
Yeah, the trunks are actually a vital representation of his character arc and what it means that he's forging his own identity.
But getting back to the live wire thing. So we set up that she has put explosives all underneath the area that they're in Metropolis, which becomes such a great detail for when the fight happens. That's additional stakes. And that becomes so important in every single fight going forward, to have something else going on besides just the fight.
We've talked about this a couple times when we've been talking about Superman. It's like, if it's just, hey, Superman, you need to punch this thing until it breaks, then the fight choreography is inevitably going to be a little bit boring, no matter how interesting the thing that needs to be punched until it breaks is, which is why adding environmental stakes and making Superman rely on his strengths of rescuing people and, dealing with environmental hazards, it produces much more interesting choreography. And the show is really good at doing that.
Yeah, I have a note that like the dungeon master rolling each of these encounters is doing such a good job with the setup because like, yeah, if it's just I'm going to roll and like I'm going to roll if I hit and I'm going to roll if I hit and I'm going to roll if I hit. Oh, like it's just like weighting down numbers. And in this scenario, we're actually getting stuff going on. Like you get Livewire, you get Slade, you have Lois and Jimmy there, you have the explosives, you have so much in this fight. Just in terms of circumstances. Also, this is where we're like, oh, fuck, that's Livewire. Because I had no idea until that moment.
I figured as soon as they started having her do lightning-y stuff.
Did she have lightning stuff before that point? Or
I think when she, the tech that she stole gave her zappy powers.
But I thought this was the first time we see her put that tech on.
You know what? Maybe? I might have just gotten it spoiled for me, but I was waiting for her to put the tech on and get the zappy powers. I don't know why I knew that, but...
Either way, it's really cool. I like that she has the tech, but then it becomes integrated into her because it doesn't work quite right.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle. I'm glad they did it because I saw a few people complaining about like, oh, everyone's power set is just tech-based. It's like everyone's power set is starting tech-based. Yeah. Doesn't mean it's going to stay that way.
I do like, especially after this whole sequence, that Superman cleans up after the fight. And that was the first moment when I was like, okay, not only is this just a good Superman story, but this is just categorically doing things that no other Superman media does.
This is the equivalent of putting the shopping cart away in the parking lot. It's like, it's extra work for you, but it is a kindness that conveniences everybody. Yeah. And Superman has the power to clean up. There were a few parts when I was watching the show where I was like, I think they wrote this in specific response to a thing that happened in a Zack Snyder movie. It happened a few times. There's one in a later episode where I was like, oh, this was the moral breaking point for Superman in Batman v Superman, and this one just shrugged it off. Cool, I love this. But in this specific case, I was like, yeah, a Superman who has the power to clean up post a disaster and chooses not to feels like a worse person than a Superman who chooses to do so. Yeah. You know, especially if he's got time to spare, which as a very, very fast person, he usually does.
And I remember like watching the fight like, oh, cool, like Slade Wilson, this is great. And then it texted you like, he cleans up. And I was so impressed by that.
I was like, yeah, Deathstroke, whatever. Whoa, civic mindedness.
Yeah, it's a great detail with the character.
Also, I spotted the Ivo billboard in the background, and I was like, what a cute little reference. And then 3 episodes later, I was like, oh, just kidding.
2.
It was actually set up for a thing.
2 episodes.
2 episodes, sorry, yeah.
They might have had one in the first episode, too. Doesn't matter. Again, this show, they start dropping the Amazotech stuff early on, which I love for a bunch of reasons that we'll talk about in 2 sections.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also like the way he deals with Livewire is he's deliberately not trying to hurt her. He says he's trying to help her.
Yeah.
I loved that moment. It was another little like, oh, the Superman doesn't get angry. He just tries to help people, even if they are at that very moment electrocuting him for some reason. And it really makes it clear that like the way he's dealing with these people is from his perspective, these are not enemies for him to defeat. They are people causing problems and he wants the problem to stop.
Yeah.
And in this case, the problem is, oh no, her power set is going horribly wrong. Let's fix that if possible. Like he truly does not see some people as enemies and some people as people that need saving. He just wants to save absolutely everybody.
Yeah. And I like that the Livewire tech, that the way it goes wrong is they have that like crystal power source thing, which is the same thing that you can use with the robots. So that we're getting this sort of like consistent element across this all, which at this point doesn't seem to be related to Superman, but we know it will be.
Yeah. Wow. Crystal tech and highly advanced robots. That's probably normal and fine. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure.
It's just some DARPA stuff. It's fine. The boys in Virginia are working hard. I don't know where DARPA's based. I assume.
1 in 50 shot.
So at the end of this all, we get clear pictures, we get clear information from them, but they're still interns, so they get denied the byline, which I think is a good detail because, again, they're still interns.
Yeah. They can't just have an unconditional win. It's episode 2.
This is not the secret of my success.
I did find it kind of interesting that how whenever he takes down a tech-based hero, when he touches their tech, he gets like a flashback of whatever the tech was involved with.
Interesting.
And it's kind of like laying the groundwork for whatever happened with Krypton, which I have theories about later.
This flashback is the 0 Day one, right?
It's like from the other side of it, yeah.
Yeah, it has the Superman logo-shaped hole in the sky and the brief shot. I actually think it's from the ground because I don't know. It's been a little while since I watched the first couple episodes. But I do think that he basically just gets a couple flashes of the Armada and the big hole in the sky and is like, that was weird, and then kind of just moves on.
Yeah. I love the 0 day stuff, and we'll get to that further when we actually see what it is, but getting this kind of hinting, again, like setting it up well in advance. Before we get into episode 3, I want to pause and talk about the credits, both the opening and the closing credits, because you don't get to see them when you're watching at least the opening isn't at the start of the pilot, and if you're watching it in 2 parts, you're not going to see it. I really like the opening. Again, it's shonen as fuck in a way that I just adore.
Oh, yeah.
Saying like, all right, we're going to take Superman and we're going to make it appealing to a modern audience who has grown up through the 20th and early 21st century watching all this kind of stuff. It feels very fresh. It's just fun. And like, it's a team thing with the 3 of them. It's great.
Yeah, it's got big anime opening energy. I think the fact that it's just instrumentals with no lyrics kind of helps give that vibe.
Also softens it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit. And also the outro is just really fun because it's just Jimmy walking and then it's photos of things that happened over the course of the episode.
I love the outro so much. I think it's so good. My one regret with the outro is that they only have a few photos in each one that are unique to the episode. But the fact that they have any is just amazing. Like that.
It's just so fun.
It's like, oh, yes, he's just reviewing his camera roll of everything he's taken in the episode. It's so good.
And then there's what's the episode where it's one of the ones in like the last 3 where there's no Jimmy walking and there's no photos. It's just the credits rolling.
Oh,
and it's
I think that's 0 day.
Yeah, there's 2. So the first one, we get photos but no Jimmy, which is when he gets kidnapped. Right. And then 0 day, it's just like this like grim, like there's just credits.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You always know it's bad news when they break the outro format.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do like how the intro feels, so fresh and new and exciting and in like the right tone of what's going on in the show. Whereas the outro feels like very classic Superman with like kind of more like orchestral, like, trumpety instruments and just like pictures and photos and Jimmy walking around. And it feels like, okay, you get the new stuff, you get the old stuff, and they're still both like tonally consistent with each other. They're still very much part of the same show, but it's nice to have that balance with the 2 of them.
Yeah. It's like this like pop punk kind of soundtrack to the opening, which I really like. It's got that guitar. It feels very energetic.
It's butt rock. I'm so sorry. It's butt rock.
It's not butt rock. The instrumentation is distinct from butt rock. It would have heavier drums and more bass if it was butt rock.
It would have heavier
vocals. Drums. You can't have butt rock without the lyricist losing their mind.
Fine.
So the question is there a butt rock version of the Superman intro?
There better be.
Look, we could slap some Crush 40 on there if we really want to, but we don't have to. I'm just saying, City Escape would play pretty good with this version.
So let's move on to episode 3, which is my interview with Superman.
Oh, yeah. This one's interesting.
I love the Scoop Troop. Before anything else, like just as an idea of here's the senior reporters, and they are so flamboyant, except for Ronnie. But
yeah, I like though we have like 2 cartoon characters and then a normal professional adult woman.
Yeah.
I always love Steve Lombard as a character. He's a recurring reporter with the Daily Planet, but he's not in every iteration of Superman. But it's kind of fun just to have like a bro.
I like that he's basically just buff Seahawk from She-Ra.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a perfect Cat Grant.
Oh, yes, she's flawless.
For how little that we get of her, this is exactly what we needed. Ronnie Troop is interesting because this is a gender flip.
Oh.
And Ron Troop is generally a younger reporter who looks up to Clark. So it's interesting that in this scenario, it's more the inverse of that. But that's fitting in the sense that, well, this is a young Clark, Lois, and Jimmy. We needed another reporter. This is an established one. Aside from the gender flip, like the characterization's pretty much on point in that Ron is like on point, very professional, good at their job reporter.
Right.
Who everyone's like, oh man, you're like the next Clark Kent is like usually the vibe of the character.
Oh, that's cool. I understand why they just flip that because this Clark looks like he's a few seasons away from becoming a seasoned reporter, as it were.
Jmike, if you recall when we did the Death and Return of Superman, Ron Troop is the reporter that is at the White House when the cyborg Superman shows up.
Huh.
Okay. I think I remember.
Yeah.
He's pretty far down the list of noted reporters that work at the Daily Planet, I think.
But it's an established character, at least. In the comics, Ron starts dating Lucy Lane at one point, and they actually have a baby together, and then they just forget about it.
Wow. Thanks, comics.
Like, it was like a whole big thing in like the early 2000s, and then in the lead up to Infinite Crisis, it was just sort of like everything was reset and just like,
God damn it. Everyone knows the whole too many cooks adage, except for comic book writers. Yeah. We need more cooks, damn it. The broth is splintering into another crisis again.
But I thought it was an effective trio there. I thought it was nice having Ronnie being like, you're not getting the byline because you're not reporters. You're our interns. We were assigned to this. You're doing research. We're actually writing it up. Like, thank you. This is all the deals. Meanwhile, she's got these two cartoon characters with her. I love the murder board element. I love
murder board. I love that they call it a murder board.
And then we get Intergang.
I love it. So good.
I like this take of Intergang being like wannabes.
This is the episode that brings in Silver Banshee, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard about her on our subreddit because people are like, hey, look, Red, it's you.
We got a lot of that. Like some pretty compelling edits where someone just took the little paint bucket tool in Photoshop and just like turned her hair red. It's like, yep, there it is. And someone who Photoshopped out the sleeves. It's like, yep, there we got her in one.
It's very
I don't
good.
have a monopoly on that hairstyle, guys.
I thought it was interesting, both with Livewire and then with Silver Banshee, both of those characters have recently been big players, big in quotes, but players in the current Superman books. And I was wondering if there was some thought put into that, and I'm not sure timeline if that's even possible. All of these take so long to put together in the first place. Livewire makes sense in that Livewire was created for the animated series, like kind of fits better in animated formats, is difficult to like really stand out amongst all the electric characters that are in comics. So like, it's nice to see her here and it, you know, it's like a good update here. It's just interesting that both of those are like characters that recently have been a big part of the world. Actually, Silver Banshee is dating Jimmy Olsen in the comics right now.
Huh. Okay.
Which is kind of a fun element there, and is reformed.
Like, yeah, I actually knew about that because I think I read through the Supergirl New 52 run, I want to say, which was overall very unimpressive. But I think that's where I ran into like, oh, cool, Silver Banshee's a good guy now. That's neat. Yeah.
I think that's like where her like kind of redemption arc started, because they were like, oh yeah, we'll play up this detail where she can learn Kryptonian really fast because she's good with language.
Yeah.
Or magically good with language. I forget if it was.
I mean, they very much play up that it's like, oh, the Banshee spirit, you know, from the old country. And it's like, okay. I've got no objections for them being like, it's a magic helmet that makes her loud.
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Well, and this is also where now that Livewire indicated that she like leaked all the tech all over the city, and you're like, oh, this is like the K meteor shower from Smallville situation.
This powers up all the bad guys to produce threats of the week. I love it.
Yeah. So I like these three, even though they're not that big.
I like
ultimately.
them more by the end of the season.
Yes.
Because of one little background detail that happens that I thought was cool.
Well, yeah, because I took it as like the start, because they're like lovable goofballs when they get the tech and they start becoming a major problem for Clark later on.
Yeah, I like that.
I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I categorize that in the same group as like Deathstroke is like a young hot 20-something. These guys are going to level up with time and become more serious threats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like them stealing the badges from the Scoop Troop to go into the prison. I think that was really fun. I loved seeing them try to pretend to be the people. I loved Clark being like, Steve Lombard, sports.
Steve, sports. Just this poor boy.
Fantastic stuff there. And then getting back to the whole like set piece stuff, when we actually have the encounter with Intergang, that we've got the ice machine going out of control. Like that's, you know, additional danger, additional stakes for this whole thing.
I just think it's so funny how it is a complete crapshoot from story to story, how deadly getting frozen is. In this one, it's like, oh, don't worry, we stopped the machine, so everyone who got frozen is fine. And then in some stories, it's like, oh, you've been frozen solid. You are now instantly dead.
Yeah. I feel like they do good setup on this one, though, because they immediately freeze the aquarium with the fish. And then as soon as it's turned off, the fish are fine.
I thought that was good planting.
Yeah. So I'm okay with how they played this one, because they're like, weird alien tech freeze stuff. Oh, turn it off. Everything goes away. Okay, cool. Like they don't have to thaw it. It just like gets turned off, basically.
No objections. I just think it's really funny.
Yeah.
I really do like how a lot of the fights are not just Superman versus one bad guy. In, you know, the first couple episodes, it's Superman versus Livewire versus Deathstroke versus Bombs. And in this, it's Superman versus Intergang with the added danger of the ice machine, where there's always a little more than just a flat punch out going on, which makes all the fights more interesting.
And again, it serves to highlight that Superman's objective is always to save people.
Yeah.
Whether that means stopping people who are hurting people or stopping thing that is causing problems.
Yeah. And this is where his heat vision comes online. So again, we get more power-ups, which is always fun. And getting back into the encounter sort of setting, the fact that Mist is able to go invisible and is able to make the ice machine go invisible means that you're dealing with this whole element of like, it's not just is Superman strong and fast enough to deal with multiple threats at the same time, but like there's information being denied him at various points so that the fight remains more exciting.
Yeah. It's also interesting that he didn't develop his X-ray vision at any point in, I think, the entire season.
No.
Which would have made a lot of those things with the invisible guy easier to deal with, but that's kind of what I like about this. It's clearly not just a matter of convenience.
His vision powers start to kick in. I think this is the episode where he like runs into Lois because his powers start to kick in, but that's the heat vision ultimately.
Yeah.
But later he is able to see mist when no one else can. Or is that sonar?
It's his hearing. That's his
hearing. They represent mist. He's able to like spot mist running and like almost getting hit, but like...
I thought that was Mist's suit fritzing out a little bit.
We're talking about in the later seasons
in
with the truck?
In the later episodes, yeah.
The later episodes. Yeah, I thought that was either a combination of his suit frizzing out or he, like, hears the steps.
I think that's how he finds him in the first case, but I think that when he briefly fades in and out of visibility when he's running, I think that's because his suit's on the fritz. And just most people didn't notice him because they were too busy looking at the extremely big, loud thing that had just happened.
Right. I mean, suffice it to say, his powers are not fully online at any point this season. Even the stuff that, like, mostly is working. Like, he's clearly got room to grow in all categories. So even if he's able to, like, kind of see, or if it's like a Daredevil, like, I can hear them moving and get a sonar kind of picture of it all, or he's just catching like the ticks of frames between like the invisibility field. Like if there's like a persistence of vision thing going on.
His eyes are working at a slightly different frame rate than everybody else's.
Yeah, he's got octopus eyes, so it actually has to be very high.
Oh,
that would be so weird.
I mean, that actually would make a lot of sense.
I just imagine, like, he looks at a TV screen and immediately gets the worst migraine.
Yeah. Oh, he's got to look at HD and 4K, otherwise he gets a headache.
Oh, God.
Listeners, that is a thing actually that only recently were they able to observe octopuses watching video, because octopus eyes are so advanced that they don't have the flaw of persistence of vision that allows them to see things at 24 frames. It would just look like a slideshow, basically, which is just lots of fun. Anyway, so we ultimately do get the interview of Superman with Lois. We also have Superman save like from the blimp scene at the beginning, which is just more of him doing good stuff.
Yeah.
But he gets the interview with Lois, which is such a classic Superman-Lois interview sequence. And then at the very end, he leaves and Clark comes in pretending to be all winded. And it's like, I just got it. He's a liar.
God, that moment.
Like,
I was like, oh, no. But then fortunately, they didn't play it in the direction that I was worried they were going to.
Yeah.
Which would have annoyed me a lot. Because instead, this is just like Lois can sniff out when somebody's not telling her the whole truth. And she takes it like really personally.
Okay, so moving on to episode 4, let's go to Ivo Tower, you say.
Yes.
This is a fun one. Okay, so Ivo with the Amazotech company.
Yep.
I love so much about this. He comes off as he's a tech billionaire, just generally speaking. A little bit more of a Musk in the school of just being like kind of eccentric. I've got so many companies. I'm so awesome. Like kind of thing. But the fact that they went with Amazotech, every single time I see a poster for it, I think it says Amazon first.
Ooh. Yeah. Well, Bezos is a different supervillain archetype.
Exactly. But it's just
Bezos is much more of like the banality of evil kind of thing, where Elon Musk is very much an Ivo character.
Ivo definitely seems kind of desperate to be loved. It doesn't parallel anybody I've heard buying any companies lately. Anyway, I think that the stuff with Ivo and Amazotech is really interesting, especially because like I don't know what happened. A switch flipped in the last few years, and it feels like every contemporary cartoon has one of these guys, because there's one of these dudes is in DuckTales, and he's also like the most insufferable character in that. It's really funny.
There's a character just like in Legend of Korra.
Yeah. Oh, God, really?
Yeah.
Really got to watch the rest of that show at some point. Obviously, I tapped out after season 2.
Just like the big kind of boisterous, like showman kind of inventor characters you end up hating them because they're so fucking annoying after being lauded for so many years in pop culture.
Yeah. I also think this is the only episode where we actually see Clark get pissed at somebody very briefly.
Was this one of the people at the gala who was like talking shit to Lois?
It was Ivo who was talking shit about Lois.
Right.
And Clark immediately is like, oh, cool. How about we talk about your last 3 extremely unethical business practices that were borderline illegal? Want to tell me about those, big man?
That was a really good moment there, because like the 3 are sent as interns to go to this gala and just like ask these like stock questions. And then Lois is like, I'm going to do a really good job, but she is actually not able to get anyone to talk to her. Meanwhile, Jimmy is being dragged around taking photos of everything. And I love that they set up all the gear for him, which is like great stuff, like so that he got stuff going on as his sort of like side project. And then Clark is trying to stick to the script, but then he gets mad at Ivo and really digs in. And you get to see like the good, hard-hitting reporter that he has inside of him, but he's afraid to be that.
I'm so excited to see this Clark get more confident with time, because that was clearly the moment of like, oh, he snapped and didn't pump the brakes on his personality for a second, and it was awesome, and then he immediately regretted it.
Yep. So next up, I want to mention, in terms of the very nice slow rolling setup and payoff of the series, Ivo's assistant, Alex.
Yes.
In a purple suit with red hair. We all know who he is, right?
Imported from Voltron, but other than that, God, I can't wait to see what travesty takes his hair away from him.
Yeah, Alex.
Alex and Alexander. Yeah, oh boy. And I like how he just seems mildly unpleasant. And then there's that one bit in the battle in the episode where we get the one shot of him with the full like anime shiny glasses and like the supervillain grin. And it's like, oh, if I had any doubts before, I certainly don't anymore.
Yeah, and that's a wide grin that he's got in that shot.
He's just having too much fun tormenting Superman. You know he's developed a taste for it.
I like that we set up that he is a little afraid of the machine kind of going off the rails ish, or maybe he doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just letting Ivo like do it, knowing that he's going to like kill himself, and that's good for his business.
The read I had on that is that he like recognized the danger, and Ivo was like, psh, it's fine. And then he sees him immediately self-destruct and is like, wow, that guy's an idiot. I, on the other hand, would be much better at this.
Yeah. So this is one of those spots that is kind of a big change. So Ivo becomes Parasite 1.0.
Yeah, I think this was really interesting.
So a few things. So first of all, Professor Ivo is a villain in DC Comics who creates a Mazo, which is a robot who can copy powers and has no connection to the Parasite in terms of like storyline tissue stuff. Totally different there. Parasite, super classic villain for Superman, usually mutated human. Not 100% all the time, but like usually human that's been transformed into this thing. In this case, robot suit.
Which also has a detrimental effect on the guy inside it.
Yes.
He doesn't know that at the beginning.
But even later on, like unlike Livewire, who seems to have the tech fully integrated into her, we don't see any element with Ivo that indicates that he's parasitic minus the suit. He still uses it later.
You're right. I think that there's potential for it to have fucked him up more than we've seen, especially because like at least one of his eyes is really wrong afterwards, and it kind of keeps that weird purple glow even when he's out of the suit, which I think is interesting. The vibe I got when I saw this episode was like, oh, so we're just fully ripping through Tony Stark this episode, aren't we? Oh, the tech billionaire with the goatee makes himself a super suit, declares himself super awesome and badass, and then immediately gets his shit rocked. Cool.
Yeah. And I don't hate conflating Amazo with Parasite. Like, while they are historically not connected characters, the original appearance of Amazo, he actually did steal the powers of the Justice League. He didn't copy them. So there is already that kind of a similarity when we're dealing with Superman specifically in a world where it's like Superman's the only villain for him to fight. Like, if it was like Amazo and he just copied Superman's powers, then it's just two Supermen fighting each other. Whereas Parasite has much better stakes. You know, like like the sucking power thing is a much more interesting element of a fight.
And then not only is it like, oh, it's just not a mirror composition of two Supermens fighting, but it's much more interesting of a problem where Superman cannot fight back without giving Parasite more power. So it becomes much more explicitly a question of like strategy and planning and cunning rather than just like, okay, well, I guess I'll have to punch him differently. I guess.
I also like that the suit is sort of organic, and the vibe I got from Ivo is like, okay, this guy thinks he knows everything, and he definitely does not. And he did not know the limitations of the suit in either direction. He didn't know what would happen when it fully ran out of power. He also doesn't know what'll happen to it when it gets way more power. Framing this as a sneaky Lex Luthor origin story is genius, because Lex's whole thing is that he is legitimately extremely smart. Like, he is actually a genius and a very careful planner, and having him working under this guy who has a ton of money but absolutely not as much brains as he thinks he does is a really solid way to sort of plant that idea in his head. It's like, okay, well, that guy's plan went so horribly wrong that it literally couldn't have gone worse. I, on the other hand, actually know what I'm doing.
I would simply not get destroyed by my own parasite suit.
You see, if I had the Death Note, things would be different. I think that Ivo being a total tech bro who's, buying his own hype, until things go a little bit off the rails and immediately catastrophically arrive for him is, I think, a really solid way to do it. And the fact that the suit is clearly not operating within his expected parameters at any point in the process, I think is a really good just sign of that, and kind of makes it a little bit of a tragic mad scientist situation rather than just, oh, somebody got mutated and now Superman can't touch him or is bad.
And the fight is so much more interesting than just the power levels too, because we've got the panic room going on, which traps everyone in there, shocks people and sucks life from people who accidentally touch it, which I think is a nice detail also, so that Superman can't just flee. That's the thing with Parasite, where it's like, well, what is your solution here with this character? Just stay away from him. But in this scenario, he's trapped in a box. So it's Lois and Jimmy, just like with the robots, where they have to like be active participants in there to prevent that side of the fight. And Superman figures out, don't hit the guy. Like try to avoid all these things. But it's nice that like Lois and Jimmy rush in to like solve the situation. It's great that Jimmy solves the actual problem by having the black light to reveal the thumbprint for where the button is.
Yeah. Also, Lois punches Lex, right?
Yeah, she punches. Yeah. She rushes in and he's like, you can't be in here. She punches him. It's like, your life seems hard, I think is what she says.
Oh my gosh. Making Lex an underdog success story is going to be so funny.
It's so great. I love that they just do not reveal to anyone who's not paying attention.
Yeah, I really hope that like when he's established and is super wealthy and stuff like that, she gets called in for an interview and just doesn't remember him. He's like, Miss Lane, lovely to see you again. And she's like, what?
You look like a less hot version of someone I've met before.
Let me guess, you used to wear glasses? Anyway.
I wonder when we see that Amazotech again, but with like purple and green highlights all over the suit next time.
Ooh.
A little refined, a little bit better.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Some rocket boots.
Oh, yeah. Nice big collar, protect your nice bald head.
We haven't really talked so much about like the Lois and Clark romance that's happening in this episode. Like this is really where we're really starting to see it. At the gala, like Lois, for example, like sews Clark's jacket after he gets tossed out by Ivo's goons, which is nice that he allows them to toss him out, like because he has to like keep the facade of it all.
Yeah,
of course, yeah.
And it's cool that like Lois has like the sewing kit with her because she's like says she's ripped jackets all the time, and then Clark ends up putting the jacket on her so that we can have a nice warm scene. But then at the end of the episode, Lois is looking at the murder board.
From the murder board, yeah.
And she realizes in her pocket is the page that Clark had ripped out of one of the tabloids, because they were like looking into tabloids to see like if there was any evidence of like a Superman before. And she finds the one thing for Kansas.
Yeah.
And like, dun, 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 it's episode 4. We dealt with the Superman, Lois, Clark dynamic triangle up until this point. Like, we actually get some good scenes with it. We get that really classic interview. So it's not just he shows up and she immediately clocks him, but we don't waste that much time.
I also thought it was very funny how they did the full like blur anime bubbles thing when I think it's when she took off the jacket and he saw her and was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, cool. We're in a completely different genre of anime now. This is great.
We're not in shonen anymore.
Yeah. All right. We'll get our fight the giant robot quota later in the episode. But for now, we're in shoujo bubble land.
Right. Yeah. The relationship is very sweet. When it is all on display, it has this like warmth that I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really pull it off. I think the character writing on it is extremely solid, in part because you get why each of them likes the other, which I think is often overlooked in a lot of romantic subplots where it's like, I buy that this character is into the other one. Don't really see it happening in reverse.
Yeah, or it's, the worst case scenario is like, all right, well, these are two opposite gender characters that are in a plot line together. Go kiss. Yep. It's like, come on. Yeah. And I mean, Red and I have more of an intolerance to that kind of writing, just our disposition. But seeing it in here, it's like, no, this is like a very well-written romance because the characters compellingly like each other in that way. And
there's additional stakes because it's not just like, all right, when are they going to kiss? It's like, boy, I hope that Lois doesn't really seriously hurt Clark by trying to unearth a secret that he's very sensitive about. And I hope that Clark doesn't seriously hurt Lois by keeping a secret that she's decided she's invested in and like, that kind of thing. Was this one of the episodes that gave us a hint about Lois's dad? I think it was.
Oh, yeah,
she gets a call and and she just immediately closes it out. And I was like, okay, as soon as we meet a general hard ass in this show, that's going to be Lois's dad. So I was ready.
It's funny because I assumed it was General Eiling. And like that was in my head for a while. And like it shouldn't have been because it's like, okay, well, we have Asian Lois, we have an Asian general. just in terms of like those kind of setups. And Sam Lane has become much more important in Superman mythos over the years. Like the craziest thing about doing the show is I actually stopped and looked up like when he first shows up. And like the thing about Sam Lane being a general and Lois being an army brat is introduced in The Man of Steel, the John Byrne miniseries from the 80s.
Wow.
Like Lois existed for 50 years before the army brat thing was introduced. And now the character is the big bad of the season.
Yeah, there was something really interesting about that because there's a ton of superheroes whose like girlfriend's dad is the military guy chasing them. Like that was the whole thing with the Hulk.
Yeah.
I think we see him at the end of the episode where Livewire is apprehended when she realizes that they aren't the government exactly.
Oh, yeah, we're the good guys.
Yeah. And I think that's when we see Waller and the general over his shoulders. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I know who she is. And not sure that guy is. But
right.
I was telling Red about this. I forgot that Sam Lane was a character who existed because I had like my Captain Stacy blinders on, where that's usually the people like, oh no, Gwen Stacy's dad is the police captain. It's like one step up from police, big guy.
Yeah.
When General Lane walks in for Thanksgiving later on, I'm like, what? What? Oh, Sam Lane. Yeah, I have heard that before, and I'd completely forgotten that was ever a thing.
Yeah. Whereas I, on the flip side, forgot that it hadn't been revealed in the show up to that point. So there's a moment in a later episode, but before the Thanksgiving one, where they say something about like, oh, maybe this reminded you of her. And I was like, oh, I wonder if Lois has like a dead mom or something they could be talking about. Because I forgot that just the relationship with Lois was the twist.
Yeah. We move on to You Will Believe a Man Can Lie, which I fucking love as an episode title.
Yeah.
Yeah. So real talk, this episode I held off on watching because I just had the vibe. I knew it was going to be a Dark Night of the Soul, like miscommunication thing that was going to end on a downer. And I just didn't have it in me that week. So I just held off, and then the entire show ended. And I was like, well, now I can just binge it front to back. It'll be great.
Yeah.
So one thing I really like about this, the main villain, quote unquote, in this episode is Heatwave, who is, for one thing, wildly recontextualized in this piece from like the Flash rogue that normally we're talking about. For one thing, it's a fire bruiser, which is kind of rare in comics. Like fire characters usually are fast instead of like punch real good. And I love that we've got a rocket punch Heatwave character. I love that it is a woman, or at least femme presenting, like different kind of character also kind of in general.
Yeah. And she's voiced by a woman, so it wouldn't surprise me. We should probably check, actually.
My only question on that one is just like, is it she, her, or they, them?
Yeah.
But it is on the femme presenting side, which I think is really fun. And the fact that we get a big, strong lady character.
Yeah, it's always a rare treat.
Yeah, it's always nice. And the fact that it's fire is great. All right, so like back on Pokemon for the Game Boy Advanced, I had the Chimchar as my like starter Pokemon, which was like a fire fighting monkey Sun Wukong character. And like I always liked that archetype, and I was so happy to see it kind of here. But Heatwave is not that threatening to Superman, just generally speaking.
No,
and in this, it's not. But you know what makes it really threatening? Having Superman handcuffed to Lois.
Yeah.
And that's such a good, like, again, the circumstances of the fights are always so interesting.
Yeah.
What I think is funniest about that is he only stays handcuffed to her out of politeness.
Yes.
Like, like he's doing his best to like keep her out of the fray, but also he doesn't want to like hurt her feelings. This is a really interesting episode because the stakes at play are not at all the physical component. It's literally just the emotional stress. The dramatic irony, we, the audience, know that she's figured him out, or at least thinks she has. And we kind of want that to resolve cleanly, but it looks increasingly unlikely that that's going to happen.
Yeah. And meanwhile, we have the issues with the two of them kind of ignoring Jimmy, which we set up at the end of the last episode, where they walk off romantically from the gala and Jimmy is kind of left to watch them. And in this one, it's like, all right, we're going squatching.
Squatching.
I love it. It's like, we're going to go hunt Bigfoot.
So sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, as soon as they started doing the whole like, oh, third wheel, ignoring Jimmy, I was like, all right, I don't want to watch this week. I want to wait until it's resolved and then I'll come back.
Yeah, so this is the episode where Jimmy then gets like sent off to go with Lombard to videotape stuff for him, or rather like
Steve.
Lombard like pulls some strings to have a photographer assigned to him just to go do his own personal projects, which turns out to be nah.
Yeah, the reaction channel.
Yeah. Which I appreciate also just because that's what social media is like.
Yeah, Lombard was a little bit unbearable to watch. I'll be honest.
So I don't actually watch that many React videos online. There's only been like two sort of like big exceptions to that, which is like I used to watch some of like the kids react, teens react stuff because that's kind of funny, but that's like kind of its own thing. And then when Invincible came out, I was watching a lot of react channels because I know the comics front and back and was super excited to see just what people who had no idea what they were walking into were going to be watching on that thing. But I don't actually really like look at react stuff. Do you guys have like react channels for your videos? Like your
they happen semi-regular. The thing is, we don't watch them either because
we don't watch
like,
them.
Best case scenario, they're like, I liked the video, and like worst case scenario, I just get really frustrated about like being misinterpreted or something like that. It's just a no-win scenario, and there's no benefit for us watching it. So and I don't think we really watch react content about anything else either, because it's like I'd rather watch the thing and then form my own opinions, but the existence of like this guy only exists to like do a little like hate reacts to this one thing. It's very funny, but it definitely hit a little close. Right. It's like, wow, here's a guy with free time. It's like, Steve, you have a job.
Ivo isn't the only parasite here.
Yeah, there's a feature on YouTube where if your content gets re-uploaded, you get a little copyright notification, and you could theoretically like pursue action against the channels that do it. So we'll occasionally just like go through and be like, okay, yeah, that's a react video. That's a react video. That's just a wholesale re-upload. That's a react video. That's okay, whatever. It's just like, all right, whatever.
Well, interesting. It's just such a weird subset of the internet that like, I'm glad that they address here. And I'm glad that we get like Steve Lombard to be the one to like make Jimmy kind of doubt his relationship with Lois and Clark, or at least voice it, but also be like a character that Jimmy hates. So he's like, you can't be right. No, I'm going to go find my friends. They didn't show up. They didn't show up. All right, well, I'm going to go find Bigfoot.
Yeah, it makes him so much more interesting than just being like a one-note, like bully idiot character where he actually makes a hard point to Jimmy that he can't just dismiss out of hand.
Yeah. I like that absolutely no character in this show is completely flat, and that includes Steve.
Yeah. Even Steve.
Even Steven, yeah. And so Jimmy goes off on his own while Clark and Lois are dealing with their own shit. Lois ultimately, after everything...
It involves a fight with Deathstroke, because the heatwave thing is almost secondary to that threat.
There was a whole like subplot of people disappearing, too.
Because Heatwave thinks that Superman's been kidnapping people because someone's been zipping around super fast with spooky eyes. Because I guess Deathstroke has a super suit, which is fine. That's established.
Yeah, I thought that worked pretty well. It's good setup for later. It's nice to have the way they use Heatwave, where her like flame gauntlets are jamming, allows for like the different tiers of the scene to kind of play out, and we get time with the other mooks who are just mooks. It's just here's the first couple of guys you fight on the level before you get to the final boss.
Yeah,
and then we get the Heatwave fight. We get the Deathstroke stuff. We've got some just good scenes in general in here. The Daily Planet dispatch scanner is so goddamn good as a like as a comedic element, where Clark keeps walking in, hears about an incident, it's like, I gotta go get a bagel. No, Superman fixes the thing, he walks back in. There's another thing, cream cheese.
Forgot my cream cheese. I do like how now that we're sort of seeing this through Lois's eyes, it's like, oh wow, he's really not good at hiding this.
But also, this is such comedic gold with a character who is both able to do the job correctly and to do the right thing. Like turning Superman into a comedic element is so good. And like you never see it.
No, it's really funny. But I also kind of like the tonal whiplash that happens when Deathstroke enters the episode, because Deathstroke is a legitimate threat because Superman doesn't want to fight him seriously. Like, that's kind of the only reason it's working as well as it is for him. But, you know, obviously he doesn't think that at this point. I think Waller even says something like, strange, Nemesis Omega is not representing anywhere near his total power. And it's like, yeah, it's because Deathstroke is just a guy.
Yeah.
They have the fight, and Clark is kind of getting pummeled, and then Deathstroke like slices through a support strut on the highway overpass, and it immediately like starts collapsing, and Clark is like, okay, that's enough. And I think he basically ends the fight.
He just one punches him.
Yeah, he just one punches him, and it doesn't like incapacitate him. Deathstroke is like prepping to go back, and Waller's like, yeah, fuck him up. And then the general is like, no, civilians, remember, we're doing this to protect people. We're not evil.
Yeah,
definitely not extremist.
I love the Deathstroke armor having like two laser swords that come together to turn into a sniper rifle.
Yeah,
like that's some good Ruby level shit right there.
That's exactly what that is.
Sword plus sword, gun sword.
It's so good, and it's like an energy sniper rifle, and it's like kind of like a railgun because it's like an exposed barrel.
Yeah, it's weird, but I like it.
I also like that we set up Sam Lane, even though they haven't established his name yet, as being someone who cares about civilian casualties a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, somebody has to. He's teaming up with Amanda Waller.
Right.
Someone needs to remember the sanctity of human life in this place.
Your top agent is Deathstroke the Terminator.
Yeah. That's got big, like, are we the baddies? Just like, I hope not.
Sam's not quite over that edge yet.
No, certainly not. But it also means that Clark is like visibly injured when he gets back to Lois, which gives him even less like plausible deniability for what the hell's going on.
Right. He was like, shaving. Yeah, so she jumps off a building, so he has to catch her so she can be mad at him.
Which is peak Lois Lane. Yep. She does that in every timeline, and it's always so funny.
I knew it. Like, really?
So unhinged. Yeah. I love that this version of Lois is just as willing to be like, well, I'm like 98% sure, but, well, here it is. Because the fact that she says, I knew it, means like she wasn't 100% sure. She wouldn't have said it because she wouldn't have needed to.
I mean, there's a difference between 99% and 100.
Yeah.
Yeah. I played XCOM. I know that difference.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's when it kind of just segues into a little Dark Night of the Soul, like break in communication thing, because she's really, really mad at him not telling her. And he's pretty upset with her for like forcing his hand and prying this out of him when he wanted it to be a private thing that he feels very insecure about. And meanwhile, in the background, poor Jimmy's just gotten ditched.
Yep.
So nobody's happy.
So he's camping, and then what turns up? A giant fucking gorilla.
And I like how, because this is DC, that doesn't immediately narrow it down.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. Which of the mini gorillas? And like, honestly, with it being Superman, it's not obvious that it would be the one that it turns out to be first.
That's true, yeah. I feel like we'd probably anticipate it being Grodd.
Or like Ultra Humanite or a Titano, but like Ultra Humanite would be probably where I'd go first. But the thing is, there's just a lot of fucking gorillas in DC.
Yeah.
A weirdly large amount.
Very quickly, when we start the next episode, My Adventures with Mad Science, this becomes my favorite gorilla.
Yeah, agreed. I loved everything about this episode, up to and including how quickly they resolve the emotional ramifications of the previous episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Red, you mentioned in terms of like having the version where we were just settling before. This is it. Oh my God. Monsieur Mala and the Brain. I have never seen two characters nailed so hard in such a way that every version that has ever existed before is just second best.
Yeah, this was pretty great. I also like how in the flashbacks we get, like, Human Brain can get it.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't need to make him that attractive with a deep plunging V-neck. It's like, what was that, the 70s? Was it okay then? Sir, this is a laboratory environment.
So, like, they kidnap Jimmy, and it looks like they're gonna, like, do brain surgery on him / like, murder him, whatever. And he's just like, I'm fine with this. I got to meet a super intelligent French gorilla before I died, which means that I was right.
Yeah.
And then Mala being like, you seem upset.
Yeah, Mala immediately being like, would you like to talk about it over tea?
Yeah, and then the rest of the episode is just like, first of all, this is just like Jimmy's episode. Everything about it is just great. But everything that is revealed inside of Project Cadmus is just so goddamn good.
Yeah. I like how they keep like moving the goalposts on like, oh, yes, you see, when we were mad scientists, we did this super dangerous thing, but now we are just living in peace. And it's like, why is there a black hole in the other room? Okay, so we also made the black hole again. It was really cool. All right, whatever.
What was it like? We got bored.
But aside from that, we live a life of peace.
You want us to just sit around the science lab and to not do science? Anyway, very fun.
Every part about this. Like, so like the Brain Mala kind of romance element is one that has been hinted at or even confirmed in some versions, but like it never comes off nearly as sweet as this one. They're just such a wonderful older mad scientist gay couple that I just need this in every version going forward. Like if you do a version of this and it's not like a wildly different take where you're going like really hard on it, like I don't want it. I want this unless you make a really strong case for why it's not.
This episode also has really good, like, Clark and Lois, because they basically have nothing to do but talk out their conflict from the previous episode, which is good because the thing that frustrated me most about that conflict was that it was effectively just a miscommunication. Like, they'd gotten onto the same page, but in such a bad way that neither of them was happy with the other. And I like how in the following episode, they sort of both had to talk it out. Because we'd been following Lois the entire episode for You Will Believe a Man Can Lie. We were sort of primed to be on her side with it a little bit. Like, oh, wow, yeah, Clark was really determined not to tell her. And then she forced his hand and now she knows and she's unhappy. And then in the next episode, Clark is like, I don't like that you forced me to reveal my greatest secret to you. That makes me unhappy and feel bad.
Yeah. I like how clear he always is when he's laying out his feelings.
Yeah. And also I like that Lois legitimately is like, she didn't want to make him feel bad. She just wanted the truth. And the fact that she equates not being told the truth with being lied to is a personal problem that she hasn't worked through yet.
This is where I have notes about Sam Lane, so I'm assuming there was a line in this when she talks about being an army brat.
Yeah, she says that she did like survival camp with her dad on weekends, and she mentions like things that they did, and Clark's like, oh, that sounds pretty intense, and she's like, whatever, then ends the conversation.
Like, I think that really like sets up why she's so hurt and like such good drama there, because we're building towards Sam Lane being the big bad of the season, which is so wonderful. I also like that they skip right past the whole he's Superman thing, in the sense that like, when he comes to her because he's like, I can't find Jimmy, I flew over the whole area, like immediately it's just like, yeah, no, you know I'm Superman. I don't need to be like, oh yeah, I went over there. No, it's like, I can say like I flew. I did all the Superman stuff. Like, you know what I can do. We're all on the same page here, right? Okay, cool. He describes the situation with her being like, he's revealed more to her than he's ever done to anyone else before. And I think that's such a good way of framing it, where it's like, yeah, he's not giving her as much as she wants, but he is giving her so much more than he feels comfortable with.
Yeah. And I think the fact that like she's completely basically violated his boundaries is kind of taking center stage in this episode. Like, she's hurt, but also he's hurt, and they both have a right to like feel that way and heal. And I like how most of this episode is sort of Lois kind of getting her shit together and like being a little bit less kind of awful to him, like, which was kind of what was happening in the previous episode. Like, I understand why she felt that way, but this version of Clark is such an overall just very sweet, nice guy who's just trying to do his best and find a way to belong, that when Lois basically just, you know, pries this secret out of him and then has to face the consequences of what she just did to this completely nice and genuinely harmless person who's just trying to live, is like, well, you got the secret. Are you happy? No? Great. Nobody's happy.
Meanwhile, it's like juxtaposed with like, while they're investigating, they're inside this red sun field that is causing Clark's powers to be on the fritz and a lot weaker. So there's some real stakes in terms of him like just jumping in front of gunfire to save her.
Yeah, which perfectly disintegrates his shirt and nothing else.
Well, he's got like scratch marks all over his body afterwards, but maybe that's from the previous fight. So.
It polishes him to a mirror shine. He's shiny in the next shot.
I forgot the exact phrasing, but when Lois says, how did you know that you'd still be bulletproof? He says, I didn't.
He says, I just knew that you weren't.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Just good moments there.
Yeah. I like that it clearly what's going on with Lois is that when she figured out like, oh, Clark is Superman, and she like her mistrust of Superman transferred over into a mistrust of Clark, even though she knew Clark. Because when they were talking in an earlier episode at one point, Clark is like, maybe Superman just wants to help. And she's like, that's what you would do if you had powers, but we can't trust this guy. And it's taking her a little while to sort of have it reaffirmed, like, no, this is still Clark. This is still how Clark works. I actually do know him and can trust him, even though this side of him is not a side that I knew was a part of him beforehand. So like while she's sort of warming back up to him and being okay with trusting him again, he's also sort of feeling better about their whole dynamic, because I think one thing that sort of gets lost in these two episodes, because they're so centered on Lois's perspective, is that for Clark, this is kind of the nightmare scenario, because he's like, okay, Clark Kent can be a normal man with a normal life and friends. And then immediately, like, his first friend, who isn't Jimmy, is like, aha, I knew it. You're some kind of weird space alien thing. And he's like, oh, God, nightmare. And then she's like, I still like you. In fact, I think it's cool that you have space alien powers. And like, to him, that's probably a very welcoming surprise. Like, oh, actually, she's okay with my greatest terror being revealed. But it takes him a little while to get there.
And then when they reunite with Jimmy, we get the reveal that Jimmy has known this whole time.
I love
the whole
entire time.
Yeah. Which, on the rewatch, like, makes so much more sense when you rewatch it. The end of the first episode is the only spot where it's, like, a little bit weird, where he's like, yeah, we're going to figure out who Superman is, blah, 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 blah. Like, earlier in the episode, all throughout, every time there's, like, a weird thing around Clark, Jimmy's like, why do you think that keeps happening? He, like, is, like, needling him to try to, like, get him to open up, but he's doing it in a much softer way than, like, Lois would.
Yeah. And he's literally like, I figured you would tell me when you were ready. It seemed like a sensitive subject, which I love, because it's like, yeah, Lois, it seems like a sensitive subject.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
But also, it's like, we as the audience should have, known immediately, like, the Flamebird guy who's right about everything wouldn't have figured this one out right under his nose.
That's why it was so funny. It seemed like it was dramatic irony that, like, oh, Jimmy, he figures out everything except what's right under his nose. And then it turns out he's just being polite. Yeah. And I thought that was so funny.
He's just nice.
Yeah, this is the episode that confirms that, one, Jimmy is right about everything, but also he's way more emotionally mature than we have been led to believe, just by virtue of the fact that, like, he's goofy and is, like, really excited about stuff, but that doesn't make him immature.
Yeah.
And I love that really cements him legitimately as Superman's best friend. It's like they've been roommates for years. He's kept his secret the whole time they've known each other. It's like, yeah, Jimmy, you are his best friend. You deserve that title.
And then, like, he saves the day by making best friends with Monsieur Mala and the Brain, who are awesome.
He's just really good at connecting with people.
I love it where it's like we've been chased by robots and it's just like, robots? We didn't have robots.
Yeah, we didn't have to put that to robots. Oh, no.
It's like, what about privacy? I'm sorry, but also we're about to be attacked by robots. I love the Brain has like his own little like mech body suit thing. Good redesign there. I love that the Brain figures out very quickly the stuff going on with Clark because they never actually talk about it. And it's just like they're clearly responding to you and he's lower powered. So it's not obvious that he's Superman. So that's really fun. I wrote down the line. We were already riffing on it, but once they reveal all the Cadmus style DNA aliens, where it's just like, what? What are you on board? So other than creating a black hole and an army of mutants, we live a simple life of peace. I love the black hole design for the damage. I love then later where we get the setup for the black hole as like, okay, we can create this portal. I love that it feeds directly into the next episode. It is so good. Just fantastic stuff with these characters who are such weird things to put into a Superman thing, but then are done so well.
Yeah, I really like this episode. I think it was a very like smooth bit of catharsis after how overall unhappy the previous episode was. Just like nobody comes out of that feeling good. And then this episode, everyone comes out of it feeling
I'm
good.
calling it. This is my favorite episode of the season.
Ooh.
Really? Oh,
like it's not without strong competition, but it's really goddamn good.
Yeah. I think my favorite might be Ivo Tower.
I mean, again, strong competition.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I do like the fact that they call the robots Omax in this episode. And I was like, interesting.
And then at the end of the episode, we get the sort of lead into what will become then the back half of the threats where Ivo is formally recruited into being part of Task Force X so that we can, up the ante a bit as we go on.
Yeah. Make more problems.
Also, I love how much we set up General Lane as being terrifying to Monsieur Mala and the Brain. I think that's also helpful in terms of again, back half of the season, we need to set up the big bad that we haven't seen that much yet.
I think that it definitely makes him feel more like a dreaded force of nature. And it's kind of interesting that he's in that role and not Waller. But again, we're sort of seeing all the characters move into the position we expect them to hold later.
So moving on to Kiss Kiss Fall in Portal.
Yeah. Probably my favorite episode title of the whole bunch.
It's an Or and a Host Club reference. I don't know why they did that.
So we do the multiverse thing. We also get our Mr. Mxyzptlk episode. All this is stuff I'm happy about. I don't even know where to start with this episode.
How about, was I a crab?
Yes, okay.
I love how they showed all the other various Supermans and then Crab Superman. And he's like, what? Yeah.
His fucking face when he came back to being normal Clark too. Just
panic.
Something about the animation in You Will Believe a Man Can Lie was a little bit rough around the edges in places. There were a couple more errors than I was used to. And then the next two episodes were gorgeous. So I was like, maybe they just put all the money in these ones.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, You Will Believe a Man Can Lie is just not the big moment. It's the space in between. It's the reveal and the fight between them. But then the follow-up episodes are the ones where we really get just such good time with these characters.
Yeah.
So Mixie, let's start with his redesign. We already referenced it a little bit.
A little goblin.
I really like it. Unlike Monsieur Mala and the Brain, where I'm like, I never need to see any other version besides that Monsieur Mala and the Brain. Side note, the classic Monsieur Mala is rough from the standpoint of we have a super intelligent gorilla, but he's dressed up like a French Congo commando. Is rough as a concept for a character, and making him this gentle giant Frenchman is a very nice update. This version of Mxyzptlk is a really good update that fits this setting really well. I don't know if I need it for every version, but I think it works really well here.
Yeah, it's well suited to this particular interpretation. Yes.
I think every version of Mr. Mxyzptlk should look completely different from every other version. He's just mixing it up all the time.
I'm down for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the comics, they implied that Mr. Mxyzptlk is also the Impossible Man, where they show a shot where he goes to deal with the Fantastic Four, and you only see their legs, and it's like the last couple panels of the first appearance of Impossible Man, except his colors are reversed, where he's purple instead of green. But it's clearly supposed to be the Fantastic Four. So I'm okay with him just being an agent of chaos everywhere. Is he a leprechaun sometimes? Yeah. Is he a weird manga chaos demon? Also, yeah. Power levels I thought were really good for this character. He's omniscient, very capable in terms of illusions and doing a lot of things, but he's not quite the level of terror. And then when he gets the hat, all of a sudden, he's really fucking scary.
Game changer.
He's a nightmare, yeah. The Legion of Loises is so interesting because they are all so immediately ready to believe the worst about Superman. And I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I think that this is a really interesting way to just sort of quickly spackle over a hole in the plot, which is like, oh man, can we truly trust Superman? Look, in other timelines, Superman has been bad, and that is why all these Loises are immediately ready to fucking kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a kryptonite gun.
Yeah. But I also like how, this is selection bias. These are these Loises self-select for your Lois League material. You also want to shoot this guy in the face.
Yeah.
And they specifically have footage of, Justice Lord Superman and Red Sun Superman maybe, and just a bunch of other oh yeah, this is this one. Superman went bad, and this one Superman went bad, and Lois is like, oh well, this Superman will never do that, and they're like, are you sure? Because what I like is that establishes the central question of the show, because absolutely every threat, every antagonist in this show is like, oh, I don't know if we can trust this guy. Who would try to just be good for no reason? It's like, Clark Kent. Maybe you've heard of him. And I just think that it feels like such a very deliberate response to the last 20 years of popular Superman media, because they're all like, oh, how naive to believe that there could be a good Superman. And it's like, that's just the mission statement of the entire character. What are you talking about?
What I also like here is how the various other Loises have kind of different levels of ratcheting up our Lois's core character flaw of completely hateful of mistruth or, lies by omission. Mm-hmm. So their whole thing is trying to figure out everything, but yet they also have this secret file. It's oh, you can't look at that, you can't show it. And then, of course, Lois is like, well, that's not going to stop me because I can't read. She goes in and figures it out. So the intrinsic, we gotta figure everything out. We'll get to the crux of this Superman guy. It's cool to see that kind of played up in these other versions of Lois. Mm-hmm. Yet also, we see the alternate version of Jimmy, who is the only person in this gang who is trusting enough to just send them back to their dimension, no questions asked.
And I loved the part at the end where they were like, oh, we've lost the coordinates for this universe. I guess we can't come back. I was like, thank God. Keep the multiverse out of this, please. Now that we've established that it's not going to matter moving forward, please keep that true.
Yeah, there's so much I like about how they handle things in this episode. I like that it's the League of Loises. It's not a League of Supermen kind of situation. There are plenty of those out there in comics. But the fact that it's a character who's normally kind of an ancillary character, at least towards the broader DC comic stuff, is really cool. That that's the unifying thing. I like how Mixie explicitly says that the way he handled things was part of his plan to make the Loises not trust Superman and try to go after Superman and not him. When the Lois that we've been following ends up on the ship, when he steals the ship, he's like, I deliberately tried to prevent this exact situation from happening by way of getting the Loises to come and team up with their Lois to go after this Superman. That's so great.
Yeah.
I love the introduction of Kryptonite that way. Those are really fun. Jelana Olsen.
I love Donna.
The fact that she is also a flame bird is so great. The fact that that's how they bond. The fact that her turning on her slideshow of weird shit she's found, and that it's Comet the Super Horse.
Yeah. Oh man, she's great. That's the only multiverse I'll accept if she comes back again.
That's so good. God damn it. How are we going to get Comet the Super Horse in here? I don't know. How about a multiversal version of, multiversal female black version of Jimmy Olsen reveals?
Yeah, please.
Telepathic space horse.
And I like how all the other Loises are like, no, not the slideshow.
Yeah.
And then the fact that she's the reason they're able to escape and wipes the records and, so that, as you said, open and shut, fantastic stuff. Very happy that this could have been a much bigger thing. And instead, it does what it needs to and moves on. And then we get Mixie coming in being like, I'll still be around, but we don't need to do it.
But specifically, it's were you in prison? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I didn't take.
And then when he sees the green crystal and he's like, ooh, this is so good. I love that Mixie is kind of this meta observer who's familiar with comics, watching it.
Yeah.
There is a take that the fifth dimension is the readers looking at comic books.
Oh, so Mixie is a self-insert character.
Exactly, because when you get into like the 4 dimensions that we're familiar with, including time, is like the way things are playing out, and this is an outside observer kind of like able to view and, like you said, be a self-insert. Like, it's really fun. And having this one be a little less powerful but still very like aware of all the tropes. He's like, yeah, Superman's like their Loises. Like, that's just how it works. Like, I know the deal. You're a Kryptonian. And it's like, I'm a Kryptonian. Is that where I'm from?
I like that Mixie is like, oops, spoilers. And also it's just like, oh, I could tell you, but it would be so much fun to see you figure it out for yourself, because that's so clearly like, you know, us in the audience watching is like, no, don't just tell him, let him figure it out, it'll be more exciting.
Yeah it's great because she has no idea that it's going to do that to him. She doesn't know that that's the same thing that they were shooting Clark with. Which, by the way, this version of Kryptonite is fucking scary.
It looks so unpleasant.
That like makes your veins like...
Yeah, the crystallizing part is what really tips it over the edge, because it's very normal for Kryptonite to do the like green vein, you know, knock him out kind of thing. But in this case, it's like, oh, I believe that could kill him if it happened for even a little bit.
Yeah, it's really painful looking. And it does a really good job here. And Kryptonite's hard to sell. The first appearance of Kryptonite was just, we need an excuse for Bud Clayton Collier to take a vacation. So we have a rock that makes him unconscious and he's just moaning in the radio show. For it to come to this point where, like, oh man, that looks like just like poison in your veins and everything is terrible. Really good. And we set it up here where it's an extra dimensional thing. And then we actually bring it into like the main sphere of stuff.
Just because the whole arc of Lois for the last few episodes has been sort of yo-yoing on how much she trusts Clark, confronting her with the potential evil Superman question is, I think, I'm glad that they got it out of the way as quickly as they did. And I'm also glad to see how she responded to it, because, again, it could have been very tedious, because I think most of us here are like, evil Superman again, for God's sake.
And I'm glad that they didn't just do evil black suit Superman. Like, they went with Overman, which is like a very niche pull of
is that Earth 3?
No. This was one. The only thing I've actually seen him in was in the Grant Morrison Animal Man run. They allude to the character, but it's like more like fascist America. Like, he's got like big American flag kind of design for him. Like, goes too far, like world police level character.
As
opposed to like Nazi Superman or Russian Superman or just black suit. He went mad Superman.
Actually, Overman does seem to be Nazi Superman.
There is a Nazi Superman Overman, which is a different Nazi Superman.
Comics.
Yeah.
I do like that they had the Justice Lords as one of them, though. That was a great pull. I enjoyed
and
that.
Also putting them in the same style as the rest of the show, rather than at the beginning when Mixie just kind of snapped him through like 8 different art styles and then Crab Superman. It makes it feel more grounded, because that means like Lois is seeing her dear friend Clark doing these things, and it's throwing her, rather than just like, wow, that guy is in a completely different art style. What's going on?
Ooh, a 90s vibe. That's fun.
So moving on to the 2-part Zero Day.
Yeah.
This kind of feels like Best of Both Worlds from Star Trek, where like the episode right after kind of is also part of the same arc.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like the family episode, in this case, 0 Day 1 and 2. Yeah, but then like episode 10, Hearts of the Father, isn't this the same story?
I was shocked that 0 Day Part 1 and 2 was not the season finale, and then I saw Hearts of the Father, and I was like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Like when I was looking at the episode list, I was like, oh yeah, 0 Day 1 and 2. What do you mean there's another one?
Okay, so Vicky Vale.
I think it was a clever choice. I kind of enjoyed them doing it that way. It didn't feel like they had to wrap up everything in the most dramatic fight of the season. It was nice that they had there was this big, huge, crazy fight where we get this kind of moment, and then afterwards we have this very personal Clark side problem that has its own. So I appreciate that they kind of split it out rather than trying to smoosh everything into one sequence.
There's a breather, and then it picks up again for the very end of the season, rather than just like one big confrontation. Because it's not a movie. You can actually have like ebbs and flows to the story.
And then having okay, this is like Task Force X on Overdrive versus here's some Kryptonian bullshit. And those are, you can't mix those two things together. They're different problems with different emotional weights attached to them.
So Vicky Vale, I was surprised when she shows up. Rewatching the season, there's allusions to Vicky Vale throughout the show. Like Lois is set up as being a fan of hers. So that's not like a new thing when she shows up. Like Monsieur Mala and the Brain, it's weird because they're DC characters. Like Vicky Vale is very clearly a Batman character. Like she's the main female character in the first Batman movie. So it's nice that we set up the character. Yeah. But what's also kind of fun is that the way they depict her in this feels like a classic Lois Lane. as a way of juxtaposing, like, here's what Lois like idolizes. Like she looks at this character who is set up to be very similar to Bitsy Talak in Superman and Lois, like confident, able to like get everything, but muckraking in this, like being kind of shady as far as a reporter goes. I think that's a really fun situation. And it allows us to set up this whole, like, people are afraid of Superman. Simultaneously, his super hearing kicks in and he's trying to do everything and he can't.
That was...
I
think that this episode,
sequence.
this is like the second Dark Knight of the Soul episode in the season, and it bothered me a lot less than the first one. Normally, it really frustrates me when I see an arc about like, oh, the hero has been framed or something, or, you know, absolutely everybody is turning on them for no reason, despite, you know, the good they've done, et cetera, et cetera. That, like, those stories are supposed to upset the audience. Like, they're supposed to feel bad. And they always work on me super well. So when they started doing that with this one, I was like, oh no, I hope they resolve this quickly. And then they do, and I like it. But I think the combination of like, Vicky Vale is trying to stir up shit because she knows that the good story here is, well, surely this guy can't just be good. Again, this is the thesis of the entire show. Like, what do you mean he's just trying to help people for no reason? What's his angle? And I like that the thing that makes Superman mess up and sort of briefly like scares people is that he's trying so hard to help everybody that he's not sleeping at all. And he's just really off his game as a result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the part where I was like, this is on purpose, because this is the exact thing that was his breaking point in Batman v Superman, is like, oh, people aren't appreciating me for being Superman. I'm doing all this Superman stuff and they're all mean about it. And they're being mean about it on like the TVs. So it's going to make me stop being Superman.
Right.
And that drove me up the wall. I was like, what do you mean Superman was never real? This is the most blatant character assassination I've seen of this character in like years. And I like that in the show, it's like, oh no, people are like afraid and they're upset about Superman for some, you know, that like he's been working himself too hard and now he's getting sloppy and it's causing damage and people are afraid of that. And he's like, oh, that's upsetting. I'll need to work to fix that. And that's it.
It is really cool that it's not like, oh, we think Superman's evil, but it's like, what's the collateral damage to puff up my own thesis for my detailed diatribe of like Superman's most interesting in terms of like problems with the city, when it's the question of not just Superman versus bad guys, but Superman versus bad guys and versus collateral damage. And this is essentially what's happening here, where it's not like, what's the collateral damage of this fight, which we kind of get through the journalism angle of like, yeah, the Ivo fight like bankrupted a company, thousands of people lost their jobs, but the collateral damage of what happens when he doesn't have the restraint to just like stop and sleep. What's the collateral damage of that? And that's a completely different question. And I find that really interesting to see play out here. So I am almost frustrated by how easily the city is like, oh, I'm suddenly scared of him now.
Well, yeah, they're like scared of him when he like crashes into the ground, and that like could have been anything. Yeah, sure, it's like it is damage. It would be a really big deal, but like it doesn't appear to be like some sort of like I'm attacking everything. The truck is a different story because it looks like that, but even then, all he does is stop it. It's not like he's like deliberately, like we know he could do a lot worse.
It is mildly frustrating how quickly and severely we see people turn on him, but I'm willing to accept that like we're only seeing the absolute worst in the moment, specifically to make him upset, because it's like in the moment, like I think if I saw a truck crash, I would probably be like, oh no, I wouldn't be like, I'm sure that guy had a good reason. Like maybe after like 10 minutes, I'd be like, you know what, I really don't think that guy was at fault for getting hit by that truck. I think something else happened. But like in the exact moment, I'd be like, oh no. I will say, I think part of the reason why this episode didn't bother me is because I was bracing for a thing they could have done and then they didn't do, which is as the episode kind of builds, Superman has a fight with like the entirety of Task Force X in like this big public park. And he does get a brief power up, which we haven't seen for a few episodes. And it looks like it turns the tables. And then he just continues to get pummeled. And I was so worried that they were going to like pan out and have like more scared people be like, oh no, Superman busted up this public park just because he got jumped by 8 supervillains in mech suits. What a monster. And then they didn't do that. So I was like, okay, we're fucking fine. We're fine. Yeah. There's still some sanity in this world.
Yeah, I mean, like a big like energy effect or a big like Superman breaking thing would be scary in person. Even a person who's like he just saved previously, like the little girl, would be scared of the sequence. But like give some distance and it's fine.
They were still there with their phones like 20 feet away recording everything. Like, oh my God, this is still happening. And like he's getting like punched around and he slides up next to them. They're like, oh my God, this
is so dangerous, lady, move away.
Let's talk about this fight. So Superman gets tricked into walking into this trap, basically, because Mist is on the run and says that it's the only way to save his sister, which is Silver Banshee. And Superman's like, I'm obviously going to help you. And this is that moment of like, yeah, no, they use Superman's innate goodness to set him up. And then everyone we have fought this season shows up. Yeah. And it is such a brutal fucking fight.
I think what's interesting is that, like, they literally used his own innate goodness to trap him on the pretense that he is innately evil.
Right,
like,
I know.
Come on, guys. What the fuck?
It wouldn't work if he's the Superman they think.
Probably the closest thing to a plot hole in this season.
Yeah. What I liked most about this is that Mist looks very guilty.
Yes.
Because clearly he's like, this guy has only tried to help. Like, obviously we're on opposite sides, but he's literally getting beat to shit because he helped me, because I tricked him. And like, he's clearly not happy. And I thought that alone made me like him a lot more, because he's kind of a non-entity in the first fight. And this gives him actual personality and makes him feel like a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, really brutal fight. Really effective use of all the different power types that I thought was so cool.
Yeah.
Everyone contributes to it. Like, he's getting knocked around. And you can see, like, Superman is stronger than any one of them. But this whole group, again, getting back to that conservation of ninjutsu thing, this is just overwhelming him.
He also hasn't slept in like 6 days,
right,
which I'm sure is contributing.
He's
like, oh, the coffee's wearing off.
And he gets to a section when he's in the park where he can kind of neutralize a couple of the threats temporarily. So like, he throws one motherfucker into another motherfucker. But that only, like, takes him out of the fight for like a few seconds.
Yeah, they're all armored and
or
shit.
like, 10, 15, and then they're kind of back in it. So he has that moment where like, he starts to turn the tables a little bit, but then I think Ivo jumps him, and it's like, all right, well,
okay.
Everyone's got the upper hand again, because you can deal with a few threats, but not all of them.
Yeah, and Parasite kind of tips the scales, because it's like, well, at that point, it's like a ticking clock for how long you can keep fighting anyway.
Yeah, it's a death spiral.
Yeah.
Like, the longer he's fighting Parasite, the more he's getting drained. And then this is a good use of setting up Parasite as like wanting to go further, and then Lane stops him. And that's the only reason it's not like a complete Superman gets killed in the sequence.
Yeah.
Moving on to part 2. This is when we actually finally see what Zero Day was.
Yeah, this one was really interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay. Obviously, we don't fully understand all of the events yet. Maybe it's a bit more revealed if you have subtitles on for some of what Jor-El says in this episode. But we do see an alien invasion through a wormhole. We get to see young Sam Lane. We get to see young Waller. Like, those
young
are all
Waller
fun.
is ripped.
Yes, she is.
She's so jacked.
Amanda Wall to Waller.
When we see the Zero Day flashback, there's like immediately a Wilhelm scream, which I loved.
I saw that too.
But one thing I really like is that when we see the robots come through, they are clearly the same basic design as the military robots that we have been seeing throughout the season, but they are more advanced. Instead of being connected, they have like floating components that are like magnetically attached to each other. I think that's so cool, where it's like, this is our best approximation of what the tech that we got from this whole situation was, but we can't do it quite as well, which means that we're still dealing with bigger shit out there.
Also, do they have the Brainiac symbol on them?
Yes, they did.
Okay, yeah. If I recall correctly, like, we see the portal open and the Armada starts coming through, and this attack like wipes out their entire squad. And then like behind the Armada, there's a big explosion.
Yep.
So I think we saw Krypton fucking die.
I think so.
Yep. Which is interesting, because it's like, okay, so what was the end goal of this because clearly they seemed a little surprised that the planet went kaboom. So like, this wasn't like a last-ditch colonization effort, was it? Like, what was the end goal here?
I don't know, because like, I guess it's possible that it was a colonization, but they didn't realize it was going to happen so fast, or it's something else. I have a pet theory that the Brainiac stuff, it's not animated series Superman where Krypton created Brainiac, but like this would be one where Brainiac interacted with Krypton, and then it was about to go, and then they were moving on, and it blew up faster, or something happened. Maybe Krypton was destroyed in an effort to prevent Brainiac from continuing further.
Ooh, that could be.
But either way, they start to come through. Yeah. And it's really scary for everyone, and then it just stops. And thank God, and they don't really seem to think more about it.
This raises one question that isn't answered throughout the season. So Krypton as a whole, are they more represented by Jor-El, who seems to overall be decent, albeit a little bit spooky and incomprehensible? Or were they represented by the scary armada of terrifying war machines that vaporized an entire squad of people? Which represents Krypton culture, like, which is Clark's cultural heritage? Because General Lane is like, that's right, Zero Day, this thing that you represent. And Clark is like, oh no, this is what I represent. And he's just so, like, he immediately believes it. And again, this is a character flaw on his part. He is so ready to believe that this thing that he is must be innately evil, because it scares him. It still scares him, even after becoming Superman. But there's another reason I really like this scene, actually. Because Lane is assuming that Superman is the same guy who he saw heading the Armada. Mm-hmm. You know, is talking to him like that on the assumption like you led this Armada through. And meanwhile, Clark sees his own little spaceship sail merrily through right before Krypton explodes. And he's like, I'm a monster. It's like, Clark, honey, you were an infant. But what I think is so interesting about this scene is that after Lane explains all this to Clark, Clark immediately starts crying. And Lane he has this moment where he's like, oh, fuck. The switch flips in his head from seeing this man as a monster to being like, oh, no, this is a child again.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was such a very powerful moment. Because, again, we've seen Lane be like, hey, let's not do evil and let's not do civilian casualties and shit. Let's remember why we're doing this. So when he's like, I think maybe this is the wrong guy. I think maybe he's actually just good, or at least not the guy we're looking for, isn't character breaking. But I love that little pivotal moment and what it represents.
So shit gets bad when the Task Force ex-criminals make their break.
Amanda Waller's help.
Yeah.
Also because Livewire's powers are no longer reliant on her tech at all, which I thought was cool.
Yep.
Seems like she was just as surprised as everyone else when that happened. And she was like, oh, cool, I can break out whatever I want as soon as that camera goes down. And the camera's like, beep. Yep. I pretend I do not see it.
And we also get Livewire shocking the shit out of Deathstroke's face, apparently where his eye is.
Yeah. Which is a way to make him lose the eye.
Yeah.
Less tied in with his divorce than I would have liked. That's fine. It's just so funny to me.
They reverse the whole thing. It's actually he comes home missing the eye, and the wife's like, you were such a handsome animated fuckboy, and now you're missing an eye. I can't ever love you again.
Now I look cooler.
But it's time for round 3 with the parasite.
Yeah.
Which goes full kaiju.
Because he and Livewire have figured out their special combo move, which is, he eats energy and she puts out energy. Great. This is perfect.
Yep.
Let's just make him real big.
When he was starting to get bigger in the hallway, I'm like, come on. Make him a kaiju, you cowards. Come on, do it. And then eventually bursts out from underground. And I was like, yes!
He goes like full Tarrasque in terms of
Kaiju Ivo.
Yeah.
Like a sextuped or like an octoped.
He just keeps getting more legs. Kaiju Ivo is in the opening. He's been there the whole time.
I didn't notice.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And this is a good spot here because we get the confirmation of like the thesis of like, who is this character, Superman?
Mm-hmm.
Ivo is putting out the same rhetoric about you can't be all good. You can't be this. Like, who the hell do you think you are? And this is the moment where Superman actually brings together all the powers he's picked up over the course of the season to be able to identify. And I think this is where we are confirming that he has X-ray vision because he's able to identify where Ivo is. And we get such a good fucking shot of him doing like the Superman fly through a giant thing, which comics like to reference because they can't do it with the main Superman usually. We've had a shot like this in The Authority when Apollo flies through their parody of Giant Man from the Avengers. He flies through his head. We've seen like Mark Millar loves this, like where it's like, a super fast and vulnerable guy could just like fly through a giant person, right? They wouldn't be that effective, right?
It's the Goku through King Piccolo strap.
Exactly, yes. And he identifies where Ivo's body is inside the suit. And we get that sort of like Last Jedi sequence of like flying right through the Star Destroyer. And he pulls him through and he answers the question of like, I'm Superman. He stops him, but doesn't hurt him.
Yeah. Haven't you read the paper?
Yeah, don't you read the paper?
Yeah.
I love
it's
that.
It's such a good moment. And also it's led into with the redemption of the thing that was happening in the previous episode with the entire city just randomly being like, actually, Superman is scary. He had like one slightly off day and we all decided he was a menace. And then Jimmy and Lois go live on TikTok and are like, hey, 5 million followers.
Hey, I'm Superman's best friend and I'm Superman's something.
I also I was looking at the comments the whole time and I love the people that were like, oh my God, Flamebird face reveal? I was like, fake fans.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't see
the comments.
Fake fans. They didn't see the episode where Clark accidentally walked in and turned on the lights.
Yeah, the new subscribers don't watch the backlog,
Yeah. But I like how basically they were like, Superman has saved everyone in the city so many times. We've kind of sped through it. We're only one season in, but it's happened. So here's how we're going to save Superman. And there's that initial question of like, are they going to do it? Are they going to do it? We know they were afraid of him. And then the lights start going out in the city as they're cutting off the power that Parasite has been feeding on. And I mean, it's not a Superman story if you don't get a moment where the people that Superman have saved team up to save him.
Yeah.
They're really good at doing the gut punch and then like recovering from it. It's like, oh, we've really hurt him this time, but don't worry, we've bandaged it. So like, oh, everyone did immediately get scared of him as soon as he slipped up once because he was trying too hard to help him. That's no good. That's upsetting. And then the very next night, it's like enough people still trust him that they did this to help him save the day.
Yeah.
It was a really good sequence.
And like whatever in terms of like, well, does that actually shut down the power grid? No, but
you know, I did think about that. But
yeah, you hit the.
It's also we don't have any precedent for like, oh, if Ivo is deprived of a power source, does the parasite suit like shrink? We've never seen.
No, yeah,
that.
we have. That's what happens in the very first fight.
Yeah.
Clark beats him by stopping fighting
Mm-hmm.
back because that's the only place he's getting power from, and the suit starts shrinking to the point where it damages Ivo inside it.
I thought it was because he was expending so much energy.
I mean, he was also
I
doing
just
that.
misread it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, fair enough then. Okay, cool.
I think at minimum it would stop it from
great.
getting stronger and let Clark actually sort of stand a chance against it.
Yeah. I love that when Ivo is destroyed, it turns into this giant fucking statue of a kaiju that's just
I like that too.
That's pretty great.
Like, what are they going to do?
And
with
it's
that
there
thing?
in the next
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, a haunting reminder.
I mean, really big showpiece, what feels like the finale of the season. And then we get into the next episode where it's like, oh, actually.
Just kidding.
Yeah. But the big players of this season, this sort of cleans up most of that. And then going into Hearts of the Fathers, aside from making the connection of like, well, who is this general to everything? Like we have moved past like season 1's threat. The US government is recruiting supervillains to fight Superman. Okay, so This is the teaser for season 2 where it's Thanksgiving. And for one thing, it's great that revealing the rocket ship to Jimmy makes him so happy because, like, that's so perfect.
Yeah. And I like how Clark is trying to be like, this is my spaceship. These are the obelisks. When, like, he doesn't know much about what the ship does either.
Right.
He can't speak the language. It's the cutest thing.
And he's, like, riding the obelisk around the background while he's talking.
Jimmy's having the greatest day.
Jimmy is such a good character in this. Like, it's a character that is severely underrated by a lot of DC fandom. And I think he's done so well here. And you're just reminded that, like, oh, yeah, this is why the character matters.
Yeah, I think all 3 of these characters, Jimmy, Lois, and Clark, writers aren't entirely sure what to do with him because the problem with Superman is he is actually uncomplicated and good. Like, he's legitimately that good. And a lot of writers are like, I don't know what to do with this. Make him punch the heavy thing. And then Lois is frequently like, oh, put her in danger, so Superman has to rescue her. And Jimmy is like, we put him in danger, so Superman has to rescue him. And then this show is just like, fuck you. These are interesting characters and we can actually make them do stuff.
Yeah. But then we get the big reveal of when they're like, and Lois's dad is coming. And then the door opens. And Clark crushes the doorknob when he sees him.
Yes.
And I love how it's initially just like, oh, he's nervous. It's his girlfriend's dad. And then meanwhile, we're like, no, he did just torture him for like an hour. Like he's allowed to be unhappy about this situation.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny how Martha Kent was fully about to out Clark to Lois Lane's dad.
Yeah, she really needs to like get a handle on that. I get the feeling that the entirety of Smallville has to know.
Maybe.
He's got to be like their hometown hero, and they're all like, oh, we don't tell them city folk. And then meanwhile, I think it's just like the mom instinct, you know, you can't resist bragging.
Yeah.
I love the tension in that scene. It's really great stuff. I love Jimmy bouncing around from everyone.
Yeah.
As like the emotional support person. Side note, so Pa Kent is just in terms of like a weird pull. Reed Scott is the actor playing him.
Who?
Reed Scott. So he is from Veep. He was in Venom. He was like the doctor boyfriend.
Oh.
Yeah. Like he's that guy actor. And it's just like a weird pull of an actor for this part.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I love the love of the turkey. And then the later setup that like Clark can just eat fish with the turkey.
He is so weird.
Yeah.
I love him. She's like, yeah, I'll just sit in front of the oven, watching the turkey not cook.
Great stuff. And great that Jimmy feels like he's so important to everyone's emotional well-being that he's being pushed too far in this episode.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so funny because like he's the only person where it's safe for all of them to tell him their secrets, with Clark being like, oh my God, the general is Lois's dad. And Lois being like, oh my God, my dad is the worst. And Jimmy's like, okay, stop it.
We're going outside.
Everyone just talk to each other.
Yeah.
Going back to my whole I didn't clock this as Sam Lane thing, this episode is the spot where I realized that Lois hadn't seen him. Because we've seen him so much in the show, and Lois has been around for so much in process that she hadn't been there for any of the sequences where the general was around.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Which just makes this more exciting that, like, somehow they goddamn turned Lois Lane's dad into the big bad of a season of a show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one could have predicted that in 1985 because that wasn't a thing yet.
And I like how he's so blunt and so bad at doing normal social situations. And like, we've only seen him in the context of like unpacking his 0-day trauma. And then like, he's at the house and he's just being like very bad at socializing and just like looking straight at Clark and being like, I swear I've seen you somewhere before. Do you always wear glasses? And Clark just
you
like,
always wear glasses. God, yeah.
Oh, man. And meanwhile, Lois is just like, God, Dad, you're so embarrassing.
So we continue the plot thread of the file from the League of Loises, so that element is still there, so that continues there. And this is where kryptonite is revealed, how it works with Clark, and we get like the whole like Jor-El's ship being like, kryptonite!
Yeah.
There's a little thing here that I thought was cool, which is that when Jimmy accidentally sees the file, the very first thing that happens is, I think Lois is like, look, we can't show this to Clark. He's still in a really bad place. This would absolutely have, like, they've fully gotten past the whole, like, oh no, could Clark go evil? They're just like, Clark will take this really personally and start worrying if he's going to turn evil. And we just can't deal with that. And he doesn't need to deal with that. So we're just going to hide this from him. And I like that that's 100% accurate. And it's really refreshing to have finally moved past the whole, like, can Superman truly be all good? What if he was bad instead?
Yeah.
And I also like that when he does see it, Lois clocked him completely right, because he is about to have an emotional breakdown.
Yep.
He's really fucking been through it, okay? This season has not been easy for him.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, but then all this wakes up all of the Kryptonian technology that's out in the Kent farm fields, and shit goes weird. Lane is just like, you guys stay back. I've seen this before.
It was kind of weird because I was like, wait, so they just let them build a town and a farm over all this classified alien tech.
So this actually does make sense, which is Clark's little escape pod got bigger while it was buried underground. They mentioned that in the first couple episodes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like the first time they buried it, it was pretty small, and now it's huge. So the farm definitely pre-existed it, and then they just buried the little ship, and then the ship just got really big.
I was like, that's pretty freaking weird, especially for a certain military that we...
No,
it's going to be really hard going forward to keep this a secret, because the whole government's going to be like, why is this on your farm?
Well, I mean, I think Ma and Pa Kent are probably pretty good at playing dumb at this point. Just like, well, golly, I couldn't tell you. How long has that been there, do you think?
I don't know. Some city slickers in black suits and sunglasses came by and made us sign non-disclosure agreements a few years back.
Take it up with them, Your Honor.
We're not legally allowed to say. Damn it, you're right. Like Red said, the ship was established as getting bigger. I am surprised at how big it gets. This is like a full-on warship, apparently, with like drones, which apparently are also vulnerable to kryptonite. And that's cool that Jimmy is able to wipe them out.
Also, Brainiac is in the ship when Jor-El is like, oh, the poison is here. Oh, yeah, I don't know if you guys saw that part subtitled. What he says is, the poison is here. And then Brainiac pops up in front of him, or at least the Brainiac three-dot symbol.
I saw the symbol, and like I understood enough of what he was saying, just because I think he says kryptonite. I think it sounded like poison. Something sounded like it. At least it was very clear when he says kryptonite, like what he's talking about.
Yeah. I do like if you don't watch it with subtitles, you're like listening for the key words. It's like, he said Krypton, he said kryptonite. Yep. Okay, we're up to speed. He said Kal-El, but Clark doesn't know what that means.
Yeah.
This is where like the portal opens up and it gets like cut off, right?
So basically the ship goes up and it fires off drones, and the drones start attacking people. So Clark is kind of pulling double duty, trying to like save the family and Lois from that. And meanwhile, Jimmy is off with the little orb and the kryptonite, which is just absolutely devastating on the bots. And I think then the ship opens the portal, and there's an armada on the other side. And that's when Clark and Lois catch up to Jimmy and see him surrounded by like the completely crystallized robots. He's like, yeah, I don't know why the Rock is like doing this crazy stuff to them. And Clark is immediately like, oh, okay, I can use this to disable the ship and stop 0 Day. A chance to sacrifice myself for the good of humanity? Don't mind if I do.
Yeah.
Deal.
Yeah.
So we see our side of it. Superman saves the day, destroys it all with the help of kryptonite. That's all very cool. We get a confrontation between Sam and Lois, like kind of like clearing the deck here. Like at this point, like it's just like, no, he's good. And also like, it's my boyfriend.
Well, she didn't say that. Technically, his identity is theoretically still safe.
That's why it's a We find out that Jimmy sold Flamebird to the Daily Planet and is now a millionaire.
So funny.
He's got so much money.
God, that's so funny.
Lex Luthor walks the fuck out. But there was a couple things that happened on the ship that I thought was interesting, because Clark takes the little like file sphere, which clearly keeps the kryptonite kind of shielded, and he flies up to destroy the ship. And when he gets there, Jor-El is there. And again, the language barrier is still there. And Clark is like, oh, I knew this whole thing was evil. And Jor-El is like, come on, man. But Jor-El basically starts taking out the drones that were stopping Clark from reaching the core of the ship. So he just starts like phasing through them as a hologram and it takes them out. So Clark clearly kind of gets the picture like, okay, he's on my side. And he zips his way into the core and he opens up the orb and the kryptonite is revealed and obviously deeply fucks him up, but it doesn't actually do anything to the ship. I mean, it's Superman law that he needs to fight through the kryptonite at least once. So he like picks it up and punches it into the core of the ship, which is extremely cool of him. And then he's like obviously fucked up from the kryptonite and Jor-El is kind of kneeling over him. Again, I saw this with subtitles, so my brain was just like, oh yeah, this is what he's saying. I think what Jor-El says is like, you brought the poison here. I don't know why you did that. And Clark is like, I had to stop your armada. You know, I couldn't let you hurt the Earth. And Jor-El says, I would never hurt you. And then he kind of puts him in another escape pod and fires him out of the ship. So I'm hopeful that that escape pod is going to do what the first one did and also get big and have its own Jor-El, because otherwise I have no idea how Clark is going to find out all that shit he's supposed to find out. But it was a big dramatic sacrifice, and the ship that was coming through the portal gets sheared in half when the portal closes and just kind of falls onto the Kent farm, where I'm sure they'll have to explain it away.
I also do like that when Jor-El shoots Superman back down in the pod, in English, he says, like, my son, live.
Yeah. So I like that he's picking it up, which is why I need him to still be around in season 2, because otherwise this is going to be so annoying.
I think they have to be, especially because then the end of the episode is like the classic season 2 setup, where we see what is listed as Brainiac in the notes going over to someone who is clearly wearing a Kryptonian symbol. It looks different than what we saw in the portal because it's like more hunched over and bulky, but it appears to be a version of the Zod icon. And then, then it's like, there's this rebellious Earth we need to conquer. They will kneel. Yeah.
It's like, I wonder who that could be. Which I did like. I like how they really just only pepper in the barest details needed. Like, oh, Alex, he's wearing purple. He's a ginger. Okay, that's Lex Luthor. Like, we all know. And in this case, it's like, oh, a masked Kryptonian who said Neil. I know exactly who that is.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like the end of a Power Ranger season or something. Like, where it's like, all right, who's going to be the big bad next season? Like, again, anime as fuck. And what's great is that you can take Superman and it still feels perfectly right for Superman to be overlaid with this other set of tropes and genre stuff.
Yeah.
So this was a really solid opening for the show. I hope that we keep building this out. I'm just so impressed with everything that they're doing with this all. It's so optimistic. It's so fresh in the areas where it needed to be fresh, but it's so timeless and classic in the spots that it really needed to keep those going. We have a really true Superman in this, and we've got a really great supporting cast, which is sometimes forgotten because they take Superman and put him with the Justice League and with everything else. And here it's like, no, he works at a newspaper. He's got interesting people he works with. He's got good friends. There's so much to do with that.
I think that this is one of the only shows I've seen that puts more focus on Clark Kent Daily Planet than on Superman.
Yeah.
You know, the 90s cartoon, it's basically all Superman. We only get the occasional glimpse of Clark Kent. And some of those are some of the most fun. Like in the first major finale, when the world gets invaded by Thanagarians, there's that one really good bit where they're like, oh no, our friends are about to be discovered. And he just runs up to Thanagarian like, excuse me, Clark Kent, Daily Planet, can you tell me more about this martial law occupation? And just like immediately, because it's like, this is 100% his field of expertise. This is his perfect cover story. This is actually his job. I don't know. I really liked how this show handled it. It felt very cozy. It never made any writing decisions where I was like, that doesn't feel good. Except in the parts where I was like, this is not supposed to feel good. This is supposed to be a dark night of the soul, you know?
Yeah. I'm just like very impressed with it all. I was gushing from the first episode on. Jmike and I have been messaging about this. I was so happy to hear that it hit for other people like yourselves as much this way. And I'm really glad that we're actually like stopping to like have a deep dive discussion.
I mean, the first time in a while that we get like a truly exceptional Superman story, it deserves taking the time to go through it with a similar amount of love as what went into creating it, because there's so much effort that was put into this in writing and animation and voice acting and all these other different fields. Like, for all the time that we've spent yelling about the DC movies, like, let's spend at least a comparable amount of time praising the one time they really, really nail it in the last, like, 5-10 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be too dismissive of some of the other things that have come out. Like, I've mentioned Superman and Lois a bunch of times, and we really liked that show when it came out.
Which is really good.
Yeah.
I want to go back and watch the rest of it. I watched some of it for my detailed diatribe on Superman, and I was so immensely impressed with the way they handled that origin story. for like the one episode where they do the
Yeah.
flashback to Clark and Lois in Metropolis. That was just so lovingly done and really, really impressive.
Yeah, but like I said, that's a different version. Like this is doing young Superman in the moment, finding himself. And like that kind of story is hard to make work with Superman because there's such an expectation of him to know what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of other Superman stories that I quite liked that have come out semi-recently, I liked the Superman versus the Elite movie because it also does the whole, like, can you truly have a pure good Superman? And the answer continues to be yes. And I automatically, it's such a low bar to clear, but I automatically respect any story that pulls it off.
Yeah.
I think the reason that Superman and Lois didn't spring to mind, which it should have, is Superman and Lois being such a specific point in his life where it's like Superman, but he's a father and he's settling down with Lois back in Smallville. It seems like, okay, this is a distinct period, a distinct interpretation, whereas My Adventures with Superman just feels like this is a definitive Superman story that you can be like, there's the character. There he is. You can go in, and if this is your first piece of Superman media, you'll be spoiled for the rest of your life just going in with this. Whereas like going right into Superman and Lois, you probably wouldn't get the ideal experience out of it because there is a lot of backstory that is asked and requested to be understood of the audience, which in a way is great because it's like, okay, cool. I have my Superman background. I know what I'm doing. Let's see what they do with this. And it becomes more of like a specific event for an audience to dig into. Whereas what I love about this version is so much is like kids can grow up with this and be like, that's Superman. He's just a nice person.
Yeah, he
and
just does the right
this is
things.
a great entry point for a whole generation. I hope. I can only hope.
I'm very happy with this. I think I will be satisfied even if all we get is like a few seasons of like this Superman that I think is absolutely perfect for my interpretation. Because I'm glad that there's a lot of different versions of this character. Because for some people, different versions of the same story resonate in different ways. This one just happens to be perfectly calibrated to the way that my brain works. So I had a great time and I want more of it. And I'm glad we're getting more of it. And other than that, I'm good. Now that we've gotten a full season out of the way that's just been about Clark and Lois and Jimmy, I do want a Batman cameo in the next season, just a little one.
God.
I want them to be like, oh boy, we're getting an interview with billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. And like, we never get the full confirmation. We just see it from the perspective of like normal stuff. I just think it would be so funny.
We talked about this when the show first came out. Like, how would they play Bruce Wayne in this world?
Yeah. I trust them to do it right. I have ideas, but I'm not here to write fan fiction. I just think it would be fun.
Yeah.
I would love for them to tease him for a little bit, like have Superman go to like solve a problem, and then there's just like, oh, they're already tied up. Oh, there's a calling card with a bat symbol on it or something.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there's a Batarang embedded in the wall. I wonder what's up with that.
That'd be really great. And they've shown they can do the slow burns well enough. I mean, throwing Batman in with all the other Brainiac stuff and Zod is like, that might be a little messy. But I don't know. They've handled a lot of stuff in this season.
Yeah, a lot of things happen in this season. We got Monsieur Mala in the brain.
I mean, this is the setting where you could have a mech Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so many options.
I don't know. Like, you could have them fighting together.
Be pretty good to have the world's finest back together again.
World's finest,
Man.
God.
Yeah.
Just saying. It would be nice.
Don't get me excited about new DC material. I didn't think that was possible.
Exactly.
Don't make me love again. My heart can't take it.
DC peaked when I was 9 watching Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, and Batman Beyond.
Oh, I should rewatch Batman Beyond. But I should also rewatch this show.
It's so fun looking at this. Like, Superman has such a cultural cachet. Like, everyone knows who Superman is. They make more money off the merch than they do off of like the actual comics of Superman.
Yeah.
And so as a character, he has settled a lot in terms of what we expect from him and where the stories have lived for a lot of stuff. Like, there's a reason why the shows, the comics, all these things are like leaning into Superman has a family. He's already married. We've already gone through all the big beats. It is so nice and refreshing to do a new take on the younger years that isn't just Superboy, that is bridging that gap and like really spending some time in finding your footing as a public figure of Superman and like really dealing with that kind of thing and reinventing a lot of the stuff that we just kind of take as like, well, yeah, of course they're going to do Parasite, and it's going to be a guy who gets exposed to radioactive material and he can suck Superman's energy stuff out. Mm-hmm. I can't get over that we don't have Metallo in this season. Like, it's so
well, not yet.
Not yet, but like it's so fucking weird. Like, Metallo's like what, like another one of those early guys you introduce because it's easy to explain. Like, yeah, it's a robot and he's got kryptonite and he can fight Superman that way.
But actually, that makes sense because we only have one sliver of kryptonite right now.
In terms of narratively speaking, yes, it makes sense.
And we only got it from a different universe too.
It's true.
Yeah. So theoretically, there's no kryptonite on Earth right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of unanswered questions about Krypton and kryptonite because Jor-El knew what it was. Mm-hmm. So something happened there, clearly, And it's so devastating to all the technology. So that's interesting. I'm curious to see them unpack more of that, which is why I've got my fingers crossed for second backup Jor-El.
However that all works. But
yeah.
So many things that you just take for granted with Superman, they like turn on their head, but they don't defy any of the core elements of the character. That's just a really cool take that is very brave in a way that a lot of material wouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Every subversion highlights something fundamental to the Superman story.
It's extremely unapologetic about its differences from the quote-unquote standard version too, which I think is really good. I love a show that is not afraid to tell the story it's telling. We just had a really good time, I think, overall. I don't think there's a single thing I would have changed about this show, because everything where I'm like, I don't know where they're going with this, is something I'm excited to see where they take it.
Exactly.
I feel like we've covered everything. We've just spent 3 hours on this.
We did go through every single episode.
Jmike, as always, at the end of our episodes, I do try to make sure that I didn't just talk over you this whole time. Is there anything we missed?
Yeah, I think we covered everything, Case.
Okay. In detail.
Yeah.
This was
thorough.
Yeah, in detail. Like, we spent 4 hours doing just our, was it Justice League? I think we covered everything for this.
Cracked 4 on the Justice League episode.
Oh, boy.
So I think we're good on this one. Red and Blue, thank you for coming on, providing insight into so much of this and spending time with it after doing a detailed diatribe about it and spending some real time on your own channel talking about the show. So
thanks for having us. This was really fun. Honestly,
this is super great.
This show is so good. Super great.
Yeah.
Is that right? Anyway, just honestly, any excuse to talk about it. Because the whole time I was watching it, I was like, this is so good. And I want to talk about why it's so good, because otherwise I'm just going to explode from how good it is.
Well, so awesome having you both on. Like, everyone should be checking out Overly Sarcastic Productions, because it's a channel that I love, that I've been watching for years, and it's so cool that I've actually gotten a chance to talk to both of you. It's cool that I got a chance to meet Blue at VidCon a couple weeks back.
Yeah.
That was
I wouldn't say
cool.
it's a chance meetup, but it was a good, quick little opportunity to say hi in person.
So where can people find you if they're not already familiar with your channel? What have you got going on? Give all the plugs.
The main thing is definitely the YouTube channel, Overly Sarcastic Productions. That'll just turn up our most recent videos. We've got assorted series. There's trope videos, there's myth videos, there's history videos, there's architecture videos, detailed diatribes, where we have the most chance of talking about Superman. We do have a podcast where we do like an after show where we talk about the videos. So there's some Superman stuff in there too. And we have a second podcast that is for our patrons called the After Show, where we spent the entire one that we just recorded today basically talking about this show.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's like a little primer.
We're going to talk about this later. We need to get ourselves prepped.
Yeah,
so there's
up.
another After show where we talk half about Superman, half about Castlevania. So there's plenty more stuff. You can find us at around the interwebs.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, if you dig the stuff I do, you definitely would dig the stuff that they do. So go check that stuff out if you're listening and you're not familiar with it already. Way better production values than anything I'm involved with. So again, thank you so much for coming on. This was great. If you ever feel the need to gush more about Superman, you're always welcome.
Hell yeah. I mean, when season 2 comes out, like, just pencil us in.
Fantastic.
We're going to want to talk about it more.
Amazing. Everyone should check that out. Jmike, where can people find you, follow you? What have you got going on?
You can find me on Twitter at Jmike101.
Yes, Twitter.
Yes.
Twitter. We're going to keep calling it Twitter.
Whatever it's called. I don't know.
Yeah, we got to. We got no horse in this race. We can just be amused at how on fire the situation is.
I always espouse like this belief that Twitter had like some greater cultural potential, even if it wasn't being fully realized, because it was like, it's like telepathy for all of us. We can broadcast our thoughts and directly message each other's brains. It's cool. What if an egomaniac took it over?
I can just open my phone and take psychic damage.
Psychic damage.
So I am still on the hell site formerly known as Twitter at Case Aiken. You can find me on Blue Sky at Case Aiken. You can find me on Instagram at Quetzalcoatl5, because I was pretentious in high school and I'm still hanging on to that damn AIM screen name for life.
Hell yeah.
Ain't that the way it is.
And you can find this show at certainpov.com, where you can find tons of great shows that are out there. You can find a link to our Discord server where you can come interact with all of us. It's a great time. Wonderful discussions are going on there. Lots of familiar faces. You can find stuff that we are putting out on the YouTube channel for Certain POV, which is Certain POV Media, where you can find my videos on Superman analogs and also clips from the various podcasts that we do. So check all that out. But until next time, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Folsom and Case Aiken. The show is scored and edited by Geoff Moonen. And our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken.
So, I have a question. Have you ever wanted to get into comics but you just didn't know where to start? Well, welcome to Comics Quest. I'm JD Martin, and every week I sit down with a guest to talk a comic that I think anybody can pick up and start their comics reading journey. We take a look at psychedelic sci-fi, fantastical action, heart-wrenching love stories, and of course, superheroes. So check us out at certainpov.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.